Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend Caller. What if with another fiction? What if Yoshino Nanami journey to you? And now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. She walked blindly through the rain that seemed to be pelting her harder than anyone else around her. The young teen didn't even bother with an umbrella, as she was already used to such treatment from Mother Nature. She sighed, wiping her eyes with her wet sleeve. I know I'm unlucky, but seriously. The forecast said it was going to be sunny all day. Well, my shoe did fall upside down this morning, she thought to herself. Look out, it's Yoshino. If you go near her, you'll get cursed, cried a mocking voice. An irk mark found itself placed on the back of the girl's head. Normally, she would just let it go. She was not good at confronting people. In fact, it was her least favorite thing to do. However, her time as a middle schooler was soon coming to an end. Plus, once she got home, there were much bigger fish to fry. Steeling herself, she inhaled and turned back to smile at the bully. Actually, about that, Kashino, I'm feeling extra lucky today. The bully, now identified as Kashino, found himself stepping back at this comment. Usually that was a bad thing in regards to this girl. Hey now, it was just a joke. Let's not get crazy here. Kashino laughed nervously as he held his hands up in surrender. Yoshino's eyes shaded over slightly as she smiled. If I can't stand up here, I may as well forget my plans. She walked over to the young man and slapped her hand down on his shoulder. I think I'll share some of my fortune with you. May it follow you all the way home. Kashino's face turned blue, as at that very second, a car drove by and splashed them both with a mountain of dirty water. He spit and hacked out what got into his mouth, while Nanami seemed virtually unfazed by the event as she let her hand drop. Ugh, disgusting. I'm gonna get you for this, Nanami. Nanami drowned out his voice as she walked towards her home, satisfaction written over her face. Her heart was pounding a mile a minute. Though, considering this was the first time she did something like this, it may be a good idea to run in case Kashino decided to retaliate. So she did. She ran for a good 10 minutes before realizing he wasn't following her. Sighing in relief, she continued her post-school ritual, hopping over a crack in the sidewalk and petting the neighbor's black cat, Kuro. Nanami was positive the rest of the day would be fine. Absolutely positive. And then she fell in front of her doorstep. Oh, so close. She sat up, rubbing her nose as the door opened in front of her. She was greeted wordlessly by her father's tired smile. She looked down at herself and her sorry state, and smiled hesitantly. If it helps, I totally almost made it here unscathed up until now. Her father laughed and held a hand out to her, which she gratefully took. Really now? That must be a new record for you. He patted her head affectionately and looked out the door. Look at that. The rain stopped as soon as you came in. He half joked. Nanami puffed out her cheek in dismay at her father's words. He laughed nervously upon seeing his joke missed. Go take a bath before you catch a cold. Also, why is your hair all dirty? You look like an muck. Deciding not to tell her father of her earlier interaction with Kashino, Nanami went upstairs to freshen up. Nanami smiled at her now clean, ash blonde hair. Wiping her face with a dry cloth, she admired her freckles and the overall lack of damage to said face. Honestly, she considered today to be successful due to the lack of injuries. Glancing around her room, she spotted the application tucked safely under her pillow, out of the sight of her black cat, laying not too far away. Her brown eyes lit up in delight. He hadn't torn it up. She nodded excitedly to herself in the mirror. That's a good sign. All right then. She took the sheet of paper and carefully walked down the stairs. Not even waiting to reach the bottom, where her parents were waiting, she began her pitch. Okay, so you know how you guys asked me what high school I wanted to go to. She excitedly slid down the rails of the steps, landing on her feet. Another good sign. Her mother, a lighter blonde version of herself, glanced at her excited daughter in surprise and slight worry from her wheelchair. She looked at her husband, who was busy in the kitchen before returning her attention to Nanami. Have you already made your choice? There's still time, you know. Nanami ran into the dining room and held the paper behind her back. I've already decided. I want to be a hero. And the only way to do that is to go to a hero school. Her father tensed, but she missed it, focusing on her mother's concerned expression. Nanami bit her lip. The school I want to go to is, Her father walked into the room, wiping his hands with a cloth. A frown planted on his face. Uh-oh, she thought. Why are they looking at me like that? Her heartbeat began to increase, loudly thumping her chest. I haven't said it yet. Or do they already know? Does this mean I can't go? She looked down at her shoes, beads of sweat trickling down her neck. I stood up to a bully today. Heroes do that. I can be a hero. The first step is to speak. She peeked through her uneven bangs. Her parents could sense her anxiety and attempted to wear more neutral expressions. It didn't help. Nanami took a breath in and out again. I want to go to UA. She held out her application, which was already filled out and ready to send. Her mother pursed her lips together and looked at her brunette husband. He sighed and rubbed his neat and tidy hair. Well, do you think you could get in with your quirk? He asked. It's not exactly conventional for a hero. His words were careful. He glanced at his wife, wondering if he was wording it right. While he didn't want to discourage his only child, he also didn't want her to have false hope. She glanced at him and nodded in approval. Nanami looked at her application before nodding. I know my quirk is weird, especially since it's nothing like either of yours, and it has a lot of setbacks, but she swallowed a dry lump in her throat. I've been practicing on how to use those setbacks to my advantage. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. I want to try at least. If I don't make it, I'll, go to a normal school, so it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Once again, she peeked through her bangs. Sakura, she's doing the face. Her father whispered weakly, staring at his daughter's sad round eyes. Sakura sighed heavily. You've always been a good kid. You don't ask for much, do you? Nanami shook her head sideways. Sakura rolled up to Nanami and looked into her daughter's eyes. The house was quiet for several seconds. Dropping her head in defeat, Sakura smiled. Alrighty then. If you think you can get into that high school, then I say go for it. She turned her chair to look at her husband. Hajime, any objections? Her husband simply shook his head. She rolled to face her daughter again. Well, there you have it. Her eyes widened at the sight of tears in her child's eyes. Oh, sweetie, don't cry, it's okay. We said you can apply. Nanami shook her head before wiping her eyes. It's not that. Your wheel is on my foot, she managed to squeak out. Oh shoot, I'm sorry. Her mother quickly rolled backwards. Nanami smiled weakly, dropping her application in order to nurse her now throbbing foot. The paper slowly floated down before harmlessly landing underneath the coffee table. There it read. Name, Yoshino Nanami. Quirk, misfortune. Nanami hummed in content as she doodled in class. It was nearing the end of the school term, and she would soon be saying goodbye to Aldera Junior High. Trying to be as invisible as possible, she was trying to figure out what she wanted her hero costume to look like. Her teacher, a woman running close to the elderly side, was passing out career papers. As luck would have it, she caught the young blonde drawing instead of listening, and, as a result, had her stand in the hall. Nanami shook her head, sighing at her misfortune. I don't know if that was my quirk, or if she's just perceptive, she mumbled to herself. She looked at her doodle. It was simple so far, with various good luck charms on it. She frowned and began to think to herself how that may have actually been the wrong idea. If I'm supposed to use my quirk to pass my bad luck onto my enemies, maybe I should actually get bad luck charms. But then again, if I have too much bad luck, then it would hinder me, wouldn't it? It was safe to say she was conflicted. Sighing, she found herself wishing once again that she had one of her parents' quirks. Mom's quirk is really useful, making plants move and grow on command. I can only imagine all the things I could do with that power. And if I had Dad's super hearing, I'd be pretty useful as an evacuation hero. Well, I guess Mom using her quirk in the garden instead is pretty useful. I think I've seen her make paint for art commissions with her plants. And Dad likes his police job, so who am I to complain? She thought to herself. The doctor had called her quirk a mutation, when a quirk appears out of nowhere, having no relation to the known quirks of the family. It had appeared when she was in kindergarten. Any school supplies she had touched had magically stopped working, or water fountains would suddenly go crazy and spray her in the face. It took quite a while for Nanami and her family to realize this was a quirk situation. Before she knew it, the final bell had rung. Nanami went inside to collect her bag. The teacher asked why she didn't come in when she was called, to which Nanami responded. A loud boy was making explosions in his hands when he walked by, and I couldn't hear anything over his yelling. Of course, the teacher would call her when it was too loud to hear her. Nanami sighed and apologized, bowing unnecessarily deeply and leaving into the crowded halls. Nanami quietly shuffled through the flood of students making their way to their shoe lockers. She walked by the closed door of a classroom where she heard a few students who seemed to be in the middle of an altercation. Normally, the timid blonde would quietly skulk by, but she found herself stopping at the sound of a familiarly rude voice. You know, if you really want to be a hero, there may actually be a way. Pray that you'll be reborn with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the school. Her eyes widened as she heard the sounds of explosion, followed by, something wrong? Nanami bit her lip, trembling before turning to face the door and swinging it open harshly, unexpectedly coming face to face with the bully. This surprised the four boys in the room, as the similarly hair-colored boy suddenly turned his red eyes to her. Her head barely went past his chest, causing her to have to look up at him. She steeled herself and glared at him, her hand behind her back to hide her trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The boy scoffed. You got something to say, Freckles? He taunted. Nanami's gaze fell to the floor in shame as she stepped to the side. No, nothing, I just came to speak with that boy over there. She glanced at the green-haired boy who looked to be on the verge of tears. With Deku. Huh. The blonde boy looked her over, before scoffing. Whatever, have fun. She mumbled a quiet, sure, as he walked away. He paused and looked over his shoulder. I meant what I said, Deku. Don't even think about applying to UA or else. He and his friends continued to walk out. That triggered something in Nanami. Scowling, she whipped around and quickly ran after him, with Deku calling out to her, and brought her hand back. This jerk. Who does he think he is, talking to that boy like that? Telling him to end his life over something like that? She thought angrily. With a resounding smack, Nanami slapped her hand onto his back as hard as she could. The boy stumbled forward slightly, before straightening out and glaring at her, a noticeable crackling noise coming from his palm. His friends frowned, sensing his rage boiling over, and took a few steps back. Did you just fucking hit me? He growled. Nanami looked at her hand, realizing what she had done. You, cursing herself mentally, she frantically looked for an excuse. A bug. The boy glared at her, his crackling hand quickly turning into mini explosions. There was a bug on your back, so I got it before it could bite you because, He definitely didn't look like he believed her as he stepped towards her. Quickly she blurted out. Because I thought you were cute. She covered her mouth, blushing bright red and wide-eyed. The boy stopped in his tracks and frowned in what appeared to be confusion as he lowered his hand. What? His friends began to tease him, causing his cheeks to dust a shade of pink as he barked at them. "Shut the fuck up, you losers. I swear I'll kill you." Nanami flinched back. He looked at her again, watching as her brown eyes avoided his gaze. He looked away and turned around. "Whatever, this isn't worth my time. Let's go." Stealing one last glance, he walked away angrily shouting at his friends. Nanami's legs felt weak as she watched him go. Sighing quietly as the worst of the terrifying event was over, she turned around to see the green-haired boy was gone. Remembering the harsh words that were thrown at him, she quickly ran to find him. Out of paranoia, Nanami went to the roof first. It was empty. Cautiously, she walked towards the edge, checking on all sides for a fallen body. She sighed in relief when she spotted Deku, walking around in search of something. She smiled a little before hurrying down, hoping to catch up with him. Quickly changing into her outdoor shoes, she ran out to join him. She found him in front of the koi pond, angrily staring at what looked to be a notebook. A charred one at that. Hesitating, she tapped on his shoulder, being sure not to activate her quirk on accident. This boy seemed unlucky enough. Excuse me, Deku-kun? Did that boy do that?" Deku whipped back angrily. "That's not my name," Nanami squeaked and recoiled in surprise. His eyes widened in recognition and held a hand out, waving it as if to fan away her fear. I'm sorry. And my name isn't Deku. It's what Kaken calls me to make fun of me. My name is Midoriya Izuku," he quietly corrected. Assuming Kaken was a nickname for his bully, she nodded once. "My Midoriya-kun." She tilted her head in concern. "Are you okay? That boy said some mean things to you." Her head was tilted down as she spoke to him. Midoriya tilted his head in confusion, finding that the action reminded him of a baby deer. He looked at his soaked notebook and felt his shoulders sag. Letting out a long sigh, he looked at Nanami and nodded. "I'm all right, I guess. He's such a jerk. Just because I'm quirkless, he thinks he can treat me like garbage." He began to walk away. Then again, me being so spineless doesn't help. Nanami frowned and considered following the boy. "Are you still going to apply to UA?" she asked cautiously. Midoriya stopped and hesitated, before nodding. "Well, I think I understand how you feel, just a little." Midoriya turned back to look at her in confusion. "You're quirkless too." Nanami tensed before shaking her head. She saw his disappointment and quickly backpedaled. "My quirk is called misfortune. I bring bad luck wherever I go. Sometimes I can pass it on to others. I want to be a hero and go to UA too. And my parents said I can. But sometimes I worry that my quirk isn't suited for a hero, like, what if I was saving someone and all of a sudden the floor collapses or something? That's happened to me before when my family went to an old inn." She found herself trailing off. Midoriya's hand itched as he looked towards his notebook, desperately wanting to write down such intriguing information. "I didn't know a quirk like that existed." Nanami vaguely heard him muttering as he seemed to ponder what he was told. "I think it could be useful. If you passed bad luck onto a villain, it would be good luck for your allies. Though I guess it could still be difficult since you'd still be affected." Nanami found herself smiling at the boy's consideration. "That's a nice thought. But regardless, I don't think you should give up on going to UA. I heard they got rid of the rule saying you need a quirk to get in, so I'm sure there's still hope." She hesitated, realizing she was butting into his business, and he possibly didn't want her pity. I'm sorry. I should probably mind my own business. Besides, I don't want to pass any bad luck to you, so, I'll, see you later," she said meekly. Midoriya smiled a little, finding his spirits slightly uplifted. Sure, but, your name?" Nanami flinched in realization. She hadn't even told him her name, and she was butting into his business. She bowed politely. "My name is Yoshino Nanami. It's nice to meet you." She hesitated and pulled out her phone. It was a flip phone, for the simple fact that all her smartphones kept breaking, and she needed something sturdier. "Do you want to exchange numbers?" she asked. Midoriya stared at her in surprise. Both teens had found themselves blushing at her inquiry. Nanami closed her eyes, holding the phone in front of her face, as if it could hide her embarrassment. In case you feel like talking. Oh, or you're, having a bad day. And not that I think you always get into bad situations or something." In her head, Nanami was willing herself to stop talking. Midoriya looked at her phone. What a nice person. Does this make her my friend now? He got out his phone and nodded a little. Why, yes, I'd like to exchange numbers. Please. Nanami smiled brightly in relief and exchanged numbers with the frazzled boy. They waved goodbye to each other and parted ways. Nanami felt lighter. She actually managed to help someone. It was a step in the right direction. Bakugo grunted as he stepped in a puddle. Ugh, gross, he growled as he ran his hand through his spiky hair. He recalled the freckled girl with the doe eyes. He felt his cheeks heat up. She thinks I'm cute. What kind of bullshit is that? So stupid. He thought as he finished off his can of soda. Hey, Katsuki, you still thinking about that girl from earlier? His long-fingered friend asked in a mocking tone. Bakugo scowled and glared back at him. Don't go talking bullshit, of course not. His other companion chuckled. Whatever. Anyway, aren't you and Midoriya childhood friends? Don't you think you went a little overboard today? Katsuki stopped, scowling. It's his fault for getting in my way. He found himself recalling the boy in question's words from earlier. I may not have a quirk, but I can still try my best, can't I? He growled in annoyance. Someone needs to teach that nerd how the world works. Crushing and exploding the can in his hand, he tossed it to the side. I hate when he talks about heroes. He grumbled lowly. His friends looked to the side, their eyes widening in horror as they pointed behind him. Bakugo turned around and was greeted by a person made completely out of what looked to be sewage water. A skin suit with a powerful quirk. Am I lucky or what? Nanami hummed as she walked home. Somehow, she hadn't had much bad luck since school had finished. No puddles were stepped in. No dogs tried to chase her. Nothing. So far, it was a pretty decent day. Maybe I'll buy a snack while I'm here, she muttered to herself gleefully. As she walked through the shopping center, she heard a commotion. She looked around and quickly spotted a large crowd forming at an alleyway. Frowning, she decided it was best to hurry home. She didn't want to test her luck if it was a villain attack. Enjoying some matcha-flavored taiyaki, Nanami walked into her house, pleased that she hadn't dropped the sweet treat like usual. Her father ran up to her as soon as she walked in and hugged her. Oh, there went her taiyaki. Awa, Dad, she sighed in disappointment. Hajime glanced down at the fallen treat before looking at his daughter. Sorry, Nanami, I'll get you a new one. Your mother and I are just so relieved you're okay. Nanami frowned in confusion. What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be? She asked. Her mother rolled over to them in her wheelchair. There's currently a villain attack in the Tatooine shopping district. A student from your school is being held hostage. You came home later than normal, and with your bad luck, we were scared it was you. Why didn't you answer your phone? She explained and inquired sternly. Nanami looked at her phone and grimaced at seeing that the battery had died. Sorry, it died. I was having such good luck today too. She paused and suddenly tensed up. Wait, from my school? She asked. Sakura frowned a little and looked back at the living room. Yes, the news is covering it right now. The heroes aren't having much success though. She sighed and rolled back into the living room. Hey, there's the student. Oh my, it's a young boy, she exclaimed. Hajime quickly ran over to see. Nanami found herself trembling. A boy from her school? It couldn't be one of the boys she interacted with earlier, could it? She's almost positive she didn't use her quirk on either of them. So it couldn't be right. She shakily walked up to the couch and sat down next to her father. The camera once again focused on the boy's face. Her blood ran cold. It was him. The bully from earlier. He was almost entirely engulfed in a sludge monster's body. It didn't look like he could breathe as it covered his mouth and nose. "K. Kaken," she whispered. Suddenly, she remembered when she slapped him on the back and recalled all her sudden good luck. Oh no. And then suddenly, on the screen, a familiar head of curly green hair ran out into the fray. She nearly had a heart attack at the sight of Midoriya running in to save his friend. Her eyes widened in horror, hands flying to her mouth as she recalled when she tapped him on the shoulder and spoke to him for a long time. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is all my fault. She leaned forward, clasping her hands together and closing her eyes tightly. Please, please save them. Anyone, please. She prayed mentally. Detruid it, smash. She released the breath she didn't know she was holding at the side of All Might, the #1 hero. Holding back tears, she closed her eyes, falling back on the couch, and letting her head hang on the back. Her parents looked at her in concern, but she ignored them as she reflected. I thought I had better control over my quirk on other people. I need to apologize the next time I see them. Nanami went to bed early that night. Hajime hummed as he was carrying a tray of pancakes and fresh fruit towards his daughter's room. Nanami had shut herself in throughout the entire weekend since the incident regarding her two schoolmates. Despite his best efforts, he was unsuccessful in convincing his precious girl that the incident wasn't her fault. So breakfast in bed appeared to be his last option. He knocked on the door and softly called for his daughter. Nanami, I've brought you breakfast. Can I come in? He could hear Nanami shuffling in bed, a quiet, I'm not hungry, Dad, following shortly after. It's chocolate chip pancakes with fresh berries and whipped cream. He countered with a small smile. There was a short silence, followed by the sound of footsteps. Nanami opened the door and peeked her head out suspiciously. Her father chuckled and patted her head, walking in while balancing the tray on his arm. He looked around his daughter's room, familiarizing himself with any new good luck charms she had acquired. Well, at least it was tidy. Are you still upset by what happened with those boys? In the end, they were all right. It's really okay. Besides, there's no proof that this happened because of your quirk, he said tenderly. He watched the lack of reaction in Nanami as she proceeded to eat her pancakes. She set her fork down after a couple bites and looked back at her father with crestfallen eyes. Just like there's no proof that this didn't happen because of my quirk. Nanami sighed and placed her tray beside her. Resting her hands behind her, she leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Can I really be a hero, Dad? I mean, let's say it wasn't my fault. I walked past the scene. I keep thinking over and over, if I had stayed, what could I have done to help? It's haunting me. Because every time I imagine myself going against that sludge monster thing, I can't see how I'd be any help at all. Just how my bad luck could make it worse. Hajime puckered his lips in thought. He closed his eyes and found himself also thinking how his daughter could have been an asset to the situation. Furrowing his eyebrows, he struggled to see ways in which her misfortune could help. He could see her running forward like the green-haired boy, only to trip over something and end up in the villain's clutches. Beads of sweat appeared on his head as he imagined Nanami throwing something at the villain only for it to ricochet back at her and again end with her in the villain's grasp. Nanami frowned as she saw her father's expressions change several times. Shaking her head, she stood up, catching his attention. Taking a deep breath in, she slapped her hands to her cheeks. Right. She clenched her fists and looked at her father. Dad, I've decided how I'll apologize to those boys, she declared. Her father opened his mouth only for her to cut him off. No matter how you spin it, those boys were unlucky. So I'm going to apologize by being a better hero. She clenched her fist and stared at it. Right. Midoriya-kun is quirkless, and he won't give up. I'll meet him at UA, and I'm sure that Kaken guy will be there too. She looked up and turned to face her father. I'll meet them at UA, and I'll get on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness after I hone my quirk so this never happens again. Hajime blinked at the sudden mood swing, but nevertheless he smiled proudly at his daughter's enthusiasm. Standing up, he put his hands on Nanami's shoulders. Right. I'll help you in any way I can, Nanami. Now what's the first step? He asked excitedly. Nanami whipped out her phone and selected Midoriya's number. First, I'm going to text Midoriya-kun some words of encouragement, she announced. Her father nodded in agreement. She glared at her phone with determination and lifted her thumbs. Nanami? Hajime asked softly. Sweetie, why are you shaking so much? Nanami was practically vibrating as she turned around to face her father with rather comical tears, having not typed a single character. Dad, I've never texted a boy before. What do I say? Midoriya grunted as he pulled an old tire across the sand. All Might had chosen him as his successor, and he was to do some hardcore community service as his training. Honestly, it was really tiring when half the junk on the shore weighed as much, if not more than, him. Suddenly his back pocket pinged, and he stopped just for a second to look at his phone. His eyes widened. A text from Yoshino-san? Glancing around to check if his mentor was watching, he opened the message. Midoriya-kun, how are you? I saw what happened on the news a couple of days ago. You were really cool when you tried to save that boy. I know you'll be a great hero, and that's why I'm not giving up either. I'll definitely see you at UA. It's a promise, okay? Yoshino Nanami. With a big smiley emoji at the end. Midoriya's cheeks burned slightly in appreciation. A promise. He looked at the tire and the surrounding filth blanketing the beach. Looking at his phone, he quickly responded, I'll see you there, and hit send. Filled with newly found determination, Midoriya grabbed the tire and pulled it vigorously. Toshinori watched from the distance, a curious smile planted on his face. Well, he seems more motivated all of a sudden. His sweat dropped upon seeing the young boy fall over from pulling. I wonder if he realizes he'd have an easier time if he just rolled it. Small Mike quickly jogged over to the boy to make sure he was uninjured. Nanami sat at her bed as she stared at the text she had sent to Midoriya. She found herself sweating at the sheer audacity of the message. She had written it out after 23 minutes of stressing and had only sent it after getting approval from both parents. Her dad had insisted on making it more energetic, as her first draft had simply said, Let's do our best to get into you, Midoriya-kun. Her mother didn't see an issue with it, but her father insisted adding more would get her feelings across more clearly. Though, looking back at the message log, she couldn't help but worry she had put her foot in her mouth. I'll definitely see you at UA. Why did I say that? With my luck, I might not get in because I said that. Then he'll think I'm a liar, she groaned out loud. Looking at her phone again, she pouted. Maybe I could erase it before he sees. Yeah, I'll do that. She moved over to the options button and was about to hit the option to delete the message, only for her to realize that the message had been read at that exact moment. Nanami groaned again and held her head in her hands. When her phone pinged, she squealed and threw it at the edge of her bed, startling her cat that had been relaxing on the corner. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Mio. She crawled over to the edge of her bed and pet her cat apologetically. After settling the fluffy creature down, she sat back down. Glancing at her phone, she cautiously picked it up and read the message. I'll see you there. Nanami pursed her lips together in conflict. Shaking her head, she sighed and laid down. Well, now there's no turning back. She groaned again. It had been several weeks since Nanami began training for the entrance exam in a couple of months. Her curly hair was held up in two wild pigtails as she jogged in the park at 5 a.m. If what she heard was right, The entrance exam was very physically demanding. My quirk might not be enough to get me in. I have to train my body as well, she thought tiredly. She could see her breath as she jogged in the chilly early morning. She wore the lightest jacket she had, hoping to increase her adrenaline and tolerance to the cold. She fought the urge to sneeze as she ran, rubbing her nose before huffing and beginning to punch the air. Her punches didn't seem to have much force behind them, as she had limited upper body strength. But she planned on increasing that. That being said, she didn't expect to round the corner, and her tiny fists connected a solid blow to something firm. She stumbled back slightly and shook her hand in pain. "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you all right?" she asked, looking up to properly apologize to her victim. Her face turned blue as her brown eyes met angry red eyes. "Eek," she took several steps back. "Kaken," she exclaimed. Bakugo dusted his sleeve as he looked at her, narrowing his eyes. Nanami noted his comfy-looking jacket in envy. It looked so warm in comparison to her thin sweater. Finally, he spoke. "Who the hell are you calling Kaken? And what's the big idea hitting me like that?" He growled in annoyance. He took a few steps towards her. Nanami held her arm out straight as she backed up defensively. I'm sorry, that's the only name I know you by," she tried to explain. And I didn't see you there. I would never just hit someone I don't know." Bakugo raised an eyebrow in recognition. A smirk crossed his lips at her last sentence. "Well, if that ain't the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. If I recall, you hit me the first day you met me," he scoffed in half amusement, half annoyance. Nanami's eyes lit up, remembering the incident when she slapped his back and her pathetic excuse of a lie that day. She hesitated, shuffling under the taller boy's blank stare. What are you doing out so early?" she squeaked out. That was a stupid question. "Convenience store run." "What are you doing out so early, Freckles?" he retorted snidely, holding a full bag up for emphasis. Nanami wasn't expecting a straight answer. Biting her lip in thought, she found herself wincing as it had dried due to the cold. She licked her lip once before answering. "I'm tea training. I want tea to be fit for the entrance exam for UA, since I don't have a power that would make things easy. So I started jogging before school." Shoot, she was shivering. The cocky blonde in front of her was sure to confuse her actions for fear of him. Never let a bully know you're afraid. Look him in the eye, Nanami. Stop trembling. Stop, she scolded herself mentally. Bakugo did a once-over of the tiny girl. His smirk fell, and he found himself irritated at her sorry state. "What the hell are you wearing out in this weather? And why the hell is your hair up in those stupid pigtails? Aren't you freezing?" he demanded, seeming more angry than concerned. His hand popped with the familiar sound of tiny explosions, as if to further emphasize his fury. Nanami's tense shoulders sagged in surprise at the scolding she received. She looked at her thin jacket and shrugged lightly. I read somewhere that training in the sea cold H helps with burning calories and building muscle." She sneezed and sniffled. Thinking back on it, I guess that's a dumb idea." Bakugo rolled his eyes. "No shit, it's a dumb idea." "What, did you get that idea out of a magazine?" he asked mockingly. There was a moment of silence between both blondes. Apparently, that was exactly what happened. Bakugo's small explosions popped again. "Are you an idiot? Holy shit, and you're trying to be a hero?" he raged. Nanami shrunk into her sweater and looked down. "I could ask you the same thing," she mumbled to herself. Thankfully, Bakugo didn't seem to hear her. "I know it was stupid, all right? Now excuse me. I need to go home and warm up, I guess," she sighed, clearly feeling discouraged by her lack of common sense. Bakugo watched the freckled girl head towards the park exit. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her trembling worsening. Growling and running his hand through his hair, he walked up to Nanami and grabbed onto her shoulder, roughly jerking her back. Nanami yelped in surprise as Bakugo pulled on her. Whipping around, she pushed his hand off her shoulder. Don't touch me, she exclaimed. Bakugo raised an eyebrow, looking at his hand, then back at her. So you can yell. What a surprise. He reached his hand out again, and she took a visible step back. What the hell is your problem now? He watched her posture. She was tucked into herself, her head tilted down. Honestly, he couldn't tell if she was scared or freezing anymore. Look, I ain't a pervert or anything. Smirking slightly, he stepped forward. Even if I was, you think I'm cute, so it doesn't matter. He mocked half-heartedly. Nanami felt her cheeks heat up at the embarrassing memory. She huffed and pulled her hair from its pigtails. If you touch me, why you'll get her, she sneezed. It's really cold. She really regretted wearing this thin sweater. Bakugo felt an irk mark appear on the back of his head. You're seriously pissing me off. You can't even talk. He took off his jacket and threw it at her, watching with satisfaction as it landed on her head. What kind of hero are you? Get out of here before I kill you. Nanami relaxed at the intense body heat trapped in the oversized jacket. She pulled it off her head. Won't you get cold? She asked quietly, feeling her trembling lessen as she wrapped herself in the jacket. Shut up. I'm going straight home. Unlike you, I'm not dumb enough to spend a long time in the cold. He scoffed, seemingly offended at the audacity of her question. Quit calling me dumb, you jerk, Nanami thought in irritation, though she of course would not voice her thoughts to him. She closed her eyes and bowed to him respectfully. Thank you. She looked up at him, her freckled cheeks and nose red from the cold. Bakugo averted his gaze. I'll bring this back. Bakugo turned around. Whatever, you do that. I don't really care. He began to walk away, heating his hands up with his quirk. He looked back and saw that the freckled girl hadn't moved from the spot. His eye twitched, and he lit up his hand. Hey, Freckles, don't apply to you, eh? A quirkless loser like you is gonna get killed at the entrance exam, just like Deku, he exclaimed. He watched her expression change into one of confusion. Nodding once, mostly to himself, he walked away towards his apartment. Nanami tilted her head. Quirkless. She zipped up his jacket around her and began walking home. I didn't say I was quirkless, did I? She looked at the sky before blinking, a strong smell catching her attention. She looked around before looking down at Kaken's jacket. She lifted her arm and smelled the sleeve. It smells like a fireplace. She smiled a little and kept walking, carefully avoiding any cracks in the sidewalk. Nanami panicked as she stared at the huge coffee stain on the jacket loaned to her by Bakugo. It was right over the chest, deeply sunk in, and appeared impossible to save. I'm so going to get exploded, she thought in defeat. Of course, Bakugo had to be the same size as her father. Of course, her father had to try it on after she set it in the living room. Of course, he had to wear it with a cup of coffee for a picture because of how young and hip he looked. Hajime bowed repeatedly, on his hands and knees in front of his daughter. I'm sorry, Nanami, I really am. Forgive this foolish man. I didn't realize it was your friends. I just thought your mother got me a present. He apologized repeatedly, though it appeared to not make the situation better. Sakura rolled over to her husband and daughter, shaking her head as she took the jacket and inspected it. Maybe you should have asked, dearest. She sighed. She ran her thumb over the fabric and tilted her head. Well, good news, the stain is fresh, so it shouldn't be hard to get out. Bad news, you won't be able to give it to your friend today. I'm sure he'll understand. And with that, she wheeled off to do some laundry. Nanami groaned audibly and buried her face in her hands. Her father apologized again, but she merely ignored him and walked out of the house towards school. She kept her eyes forward as she walked. It's okay, it's okay. I'll just say I'm washing it out of courtesy and I'll give it to him tomorrow, she murmured to herself. Yeah, I'll say Kaken, Since you were so kind to me, I'm washing your jacket and will return it tomorrow. That sounds good, she exclaimed to herself. She clenched her fists in determination, pleased with her solution. She continued to walk before pausing. Wait, she groaned audibly, catching the attention of some passerby. Blushing, she tilted her head down, hoping to disappear. Doesn't he dislike being called Kaken? Oh, but I don't even know his proper name. Why didn't I ask him? POV change. Midoriya. Midoriya walked towards school, feeling very half asleep. All Might's training regimen is exhausting. And then there's that chance that I'm not even compatible, he thought as he let out a mighty yawn and trudged on. His eyes wandered upward and lit up at the sight of Nanami. Picking up his pace into a jog, he quickly stood by her side. Hi, Yoshino-san. Duh, I'm just washing it, I swear, she cried out. He watched in confusion as she heavily flinched. She slowly turned to him and relaxed immediately upon seeing her fellow freckled one. She nodded her head in greeting to him. Midoriya smiled a little. Geez, I thought I was shy, he thought in amusement. Are you okay? He asked, a small smile on his face. When she didn't immediately answer, his smile dropped. Wash what? Did something happen? Nanami pursed her lips. It was a worrying sight. She twirled her long hair around her index finger and tugged it slightly. Finally, she spoke. Kei Kaken gave me his jacket earlier this morning. Just to borrow because it was cold and I was jogging in a thin jacket. She held out her hands and flexed them similarly to when Bakugo would make small explosions. I think he may have been keeping himself warm with his quirk, but… Midoriya's eyes widened, his fingers twitching with the need to write this information down. Kaken did something like that. Wait, he can keep himself warm. He put his hand to his chin and thought. If he can keep himself warm in winter, he'll sweat more, so even though he'll be a slow start, he'll still be able to produce more explosions. I wonder if he'd still be able to create big explosions against villains. Maybe if he concentrated explosions on being hotter, would he sweat more? Can he control the temperature of his explosions, or do they remain the same temp? He trailed off at the sight of Nanami's concerned expression. Sorry, I have a habit of muttering. Nanami nodded warily. I kind of thought you were possessed for a moment, she admitted timidly. Midoriya laughed nervously. I'd be lying if I said you were the first to say that. So Kaken gave you his jacket. That's surprisingly nice of him. Why would that? He paused and slapped his fist into his palm. Oh, I get it. Your quirk must have caused something to happen to it, he exclaimed. His sweat dropped as Nanami tried to hide in her school jacket. Right on the money, she looked back at him. I don't want him thinking I'm trying to stall, but my mom is cleaning it up so. Midoriya nodded. You said you can pass your misfortune on to others and items, right? He asked. Nanami nodded. Maybe you should hold off on giving him the jacket. You wore it so if something happened to it, it must have absorbed your misfortune. How long does it stay like that? Nanami paused and considered the jacket. I wore it for a couple of hours, she blushed, realizing that was probably unnecessary information. I was cold, so I fell asleep in it. Anyway, it's a big jacket on me. The time varies, but if I did pass my misfortune onto it, could vary between 1 week and 1 month. She cringed at her own words, seeming worried about something Midoriya wouldn't understand. A whole month, huh? Why don't you just tell him? Kaken may be mean, violent, short-tempered, and an overall jerk of a person. But if you tell him, you'll most likely be left off the hook. Tell him about your quirk, and I'm sure he might understand and will be less likely to explode you. He offered. He watched as Nanami trembled and pondered if he could have worded that plan better. Nanami looked at her shoes. He thinks I'm quirkless for some reason. I think when I said, I don't have a power that would make things easy, he misunderstood. Do you think he'd get mad? She asked. The school quickly came into view and Midoriya, could see her tugging at her hair again. It seemed to be a nervous habit. Midoriya smiled weakly. Knowing Kaken, he actually might get mad. He always assumes things. He might think she deceived him, he thought. Frequently being on the receiving end of Bakugo's rage, he sympathized with the girl. Maybe it's time to change the topic for a while, he thought. Yoshino-san. You can just call me Nanami, she mumbled. He looked at her and saw she had a shaky smile. We were friends, right? So Nanami is fine. She paused and looked at her shoes. Or do you prefer Yoshino? I never really had friends, so, Midoriya's face turned bright red, and he averted his gaze. And Nanami-san is fine. Then you can call me Izuku. He covered his face in embarrassment. Having a girl call me by my first name. I never thought this day would come. I don't know if I'm ready for it. Izuku? Nanami offered hesitantly. Like Izuku, but with kun at the end. She hesitated and waved her hands anxiously. Oh, or is that too informal? I'm sorry, am I being weird? Both freckled teens didn't say anything and hid their red faces in a differently awkward fashion. Many people walked past the two embarrassed students. They found them to be an odd sight, but kept walking regardless, muttering about their odd behavior. Izuku cleared his throat. I wanted to ask. Yoshino, I mean Nanami-san. Who's your favorite hero? He asked. Nanami pondered the thought as they entered the school. I'd have to say, Eraserhead. He's an underground hero, I doubt you know him. Izuku excitedly jumped into the topic. Eraserhead is the hero that erases quirks just by looking. He doesn't like being in the spotlight, so not many people know him. It's said he's trained in hand-to-hand combat, but there's not much video on him. But he's capable, they say. I heard he graduated from UA and… Izuku, you're very enthusiastic about heroes. She noted as she took off her shoes and placed them in her locker. Oh yeah, I guess I am. I've always enjoyed analyzing them. He smiled a little as he put on his school slippers. My all-time favorite is All Might. He saves everyone with a smile. I want to be just like him. He looked at his hand and clenched it into a fist. Once he grants me his quirk, I'll be even closer to that goal. Nanami smiled a little and nodded. That's a great goal. Even without a quirk, I'm sure you'll be an amazing hero. I'll be your first fan too. Izuku blushed as he adjusted his shoe. Yeah, the same goes for you. I'll be your fan when you're a hero. He gave her a thumbs up, smiling. They waved to each other as they went to their separate classes. Shift POV. Just talk to him. It'll lower your risk of getting exploded. Izuku said it will be okay. Don't be such a coward. Nanami thought to herself. She paused as she realized something. I didn't ask Izuku what Kaken's name is. At this rate, he'll really think I like him if I keep calling him by this pet name. She groaned loudly. What an idiot. Oh, an idiot you say? Well, if you think so lowly of my class, you can stand in the hall, Yoshino-san. Her teacher hissed, standing right beside her desk. Nanami sighed and walked out into the hall. Geez, she looked out the window just ahead of her class. Shaking her head, she looked at her hands. Kaken's jacket must have absorbed my bad luck, as Izuku said. I haven't had much bad luck since this morning. Well, there was that moment where my foot got stuck in a bucket. Nanami crouched down and drew on the floor with her fingers. She sighed and decided to enjoy the silence for a change. She watched various students walk across the hall and noted that there were some people with some interesting-looking quirks. She wondered how many she would see in the entrance exam, if any. Maybe I should analyze things like Izuku. It must be helpful to be well-informed like that. Sighing, she looked up at the ceiling and puckered her lips. I wonder if I should train at a dojo. Or maybe, she murmured. I wonder if Izuku has any fighting skills. She tried to imagine Izuku fighting, as he was now, and found that she actually couldn't. She giggled. He's so nice I can't imagine him punching anyone, she thought. She shook her head in frustration. I've got to learn somehow. The entrance exam is about showing off your quirk and skills or something. She wrapped the long section of her hair around her finger and tugged. Think, come on. How can I use my quirk to my advantage? Suddenly her phone vibrated. Looking back and forward through the halls, she silently pulled it out. It was a text from her mother. Okay, so honey, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I got the coffee stain out. The bad news. I just want you to know this was unintentional but… Nanami scrolled down and nearly screamed. The jacket Kaken had given her was originally a pale mustard yellow, with a pale beige fluff on the hood. Now, the fluff was pink, and the jacket was an odd pinkish orange. Somehow a red shirt was left in the washing machine, even though I could have sworn it was empty, and it turned orange and pink. I'm sorry, but even I can't save this. After school, go see how much it costs, and we will replace it. Nanami fell back on her bum. Yeah, it definitely absorbed my quirk, she whimpered. As soon as the bell rang, Nanami raced towards Izuku's class. She found that it was slightly easier to avoid getting swept away in the crowd. She spotted the door of his class and leapt out of the sea of students. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? She pulled the door open and again came face to face with the one person she dreaded seeing all day, Kaken and his friends. Her eyes widened. She found herself instantly trembling at the sight of him. Hey, Katsuki, it's your girlfriend, his long-fingered companion teased. Nanami's eyes widened in acknowledgement. Katsuki is his name. Katsuki's eye twitched, and he turned to glare at him. Shut up, you clown. She's not my girlfriend. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. What do you want? Come to return what you borrowed, he asked gruffly. He knows. Nanami's trembling came to a head as she began to tear up. I'm gonna get exploded. Katsuki flinched. What the hell are you crying for? I don't know. Probably because your face is scarier than it is cute. His other companion laughed. An irk mark appeared on the back of his head. He glared at him. I swear I'll kill you. He turned back at Nanami, flinching, and clicked his tongue. He reached his hand out. Hey. She looked to the side and saw Izuku staring in concern. Izuku, she called out. She ran past Katsuki and clung onto Izuku's jacket, shaking him lightly as she buried her face in his shoulder. She opened her mouth to speak, but it just came out as a shrieking, squeaky mess. Izuku blushed at the close contact, but put his hands on her shoulders and leaned down, tilting his ear towards her to try and decipher her rambling. She turned her head to face him. Izuku's face turned bright red, and he immediately lifted his head away. I can't understand you, Nanami-san, he said a little loudly. Nanami sniffled and lifted her head and whispered in his ear. POV change. Bakugo. Bakugo watched in annoyance at the sight of Freckles clinging onto the nerd. Wasn't he supposed to be the one she thought was cute? He scowled when Deku practically hugged her and got extra close to her. Just as he was about to leave, Nanami leaned up, while Deku's face was exceptionally close. To the untrained eye, it appeared they were preparing to kiss. And then Deku backed away, causing Bakugo to release a sigh he didn't know he was holding. What does he think he's doing? And did he call her Nanami? Is that her first name? How are they on a first-name basis? He paused at his thought process. Wait, why do I care? I don't. Then she whispered something. Deku jumped and looked towards him, before back at Nanami. She nodded and showed her his phone. Deku looked at it, eyes widening as he grabbed her phone. He looked at the jacket and pointed to Bakugo, who in turn glared at him. He looked back at Nanami. She buried her face in her hands and nodded. Bakugo felt his eye twitch. What the hell are you gossiping about? He marched over to them and grabbed Nanami's phone out of Deku's hand. Deku reached over and tried to grab it back. Kaken, wait before you look at that. Bakugo's hand popped in irritation, causing him to back up immediately. He scoffed and looked at the phone, eyes widening at the sight of his jacket. What the hell? Is this my jacket? He looked at Nanami, bigger explosions emitting from his palm. What the hell did you do to it? That thing costs 20,000 yen. Nanami shrunk down. I'm sorry. We tried to clean it, but it got mixed with a red shirt and it bled and I'll pay it back, I promise. I'll get you a new one. She looked down, trying to hold back her tears. I'm sorry, I really am. It wasn't intentional, she muttered as she inched behind Deku. Bakugo clicked his tongue. He resisted the strong urge to kill her phone. Fine. But it better be the same one. I won't accept a knockoff. He shoved her phone back into her hands. Nanami's eyes lit up, and she nodded. Why, yes, of course. She nodded, wiping her eyes. It'll take a while to raise some money since I'm not allowed to have a part-time job. She saw his eye twitch and just about jumped 3 feet back. I will get it though, I promise. His long-fingered companion looked back at him. A sarcastic smile plastered over his face. Katsuki, you're scaring the girl half to death. That is not how you pick up chicks. He went behind him and pushed him out of the class. He'll wait, but you're probably going to have to kiss him to make him forgive ya. Bakugo's eyes widened, and he released several medium-sized explosions. What the hell are you saying? Don't lump me in with you perverts. He didn't see Nanami's expression as he was pushed out of the room. The second companion shook his head. Dude, you're asking for Katsuki to explode you. POV change, back to Nanami. Nanami watched as they left, and could vaguely hear his yells getting further away. Her cheeks burned red as she glanced at Izuku. You don't think he'll make me kiss him, do you? Izuku laughed nervously and waved his hand to shoo away her worries. Don't worry, Kaken isn't interested in things like romance. He looked at the image on her phone. I guess it did absorb your misfortune. Have you been any luckier today? Nanami tugged at her hair and thought. Maybe a little. I didn't fall down any stairs or get splashed by cars. But I stepped in a bucket, so I guess I'm not completely lucky. That could mean that the bad luck on it has already started returning to me. She hesitated. His name is Katsuki, she asked. Oh, yeah, Bakugo Katsuki. You didn't know? I thought you liked him, Izuku asked in confusion. Nanami's eyes widened, and she shook her head, wildly messing up her already unruly hair. No, Izuku, no. I said he was cute because, he is, physically. But I only said that because I was scared of getting exploded when I hit him. She poked her fingers together timidly. He's so scary. How do you deal with him? She whimpered. Izuku blinked and smiled a little. I just try to stay out of his way. Nanami only nodded. Somehow that sounded like a challenging feat. Nanami walked through the shopping district, kicking a can as she went. So far she was experiencing a pretty rough morning. She tugged at her hair in annoyance with herself. Here I want to be a hero, but I can't even talk to Bakugo-kun without freaking out. She looked at her hand. He has such a powerful quirk. Not only that, he looks like he's physically strong. How am I supposed to be able to compete with that? She clenched her fist. Will they even notice someone like me? Furiously, Nanami shook her head. No. Think positive, Nanami. Mom said to try to use your gymnastics background. You can use that somehow. She tried to pump herself up. Suddenly she missed the can and lost her footing, tipping forward. She began to frantically wave her hands in an effort to catch herself. Alas, it was in vain as she hit the ground face first with a resounding splat. Just as she was going to get up, she shrieked as she felt someone stepping on her head, only to immediately remove their foot. There was a long silence as she felt people staring at her. Oh, she groaned. My apologies, are you all right? The voice sounded cold but concerned. Nanami raised one arm, not lifting her head. No, no, I'm fine. Just let me die in my shame a little longer. She waved her hand dismissively, her voice monotonous and defeated. She felt her hand being grabbed, and she closed her eyes tightly. Close it in a box. Don't pass your quirk on. Don't do it. This nice person doesn't deserve it. She was lifted easily and felt her feet leave the ground for a second, as if the person wasn't expecting her to be so light. I didn't mean to step on you. I didn't see you. Nanami dusted herself off and looked up at him. Her cheeks turned bright red, red like half of his hair. Her eyes wandered to the white half. She was so intrigued. He was the prettiest boy she had ever seen. And he was, holding her hand. She shrieked and pulled her hand back. I'm sorry. I apologize. I was in your way. She began to back up. Why you shouldn't touch me if you don't want anything bad to happen to you. The boy tilted his head in confusion before his eyes darkened when a hand placed itself on his shoulder. Are you threatening my son? Nanami's eyes widened as she looked up and saw the flame hero, Endeavor. Her expression twisted into one of confusion as the hero was out of his usual area. Her face paled as she looked back at the boy, whose face seemed to twist into a greater rage as he shoved Endeavor's hand off his shoulder. And no, sir. Not at all. I would never. I just... Leave her alone. It was an accident. Even if she was threatening me, I stepped on her. There's no reason for this mistreatment. The pretty boy commented. Endeavor scoffed. You're too soft, Shoto. He looked at Nanami. I came here because we have some business to attend to. You're in the way. She locked eyes with the number 2 hero. Piercing blue eyes narrowed down at her. Nanami began to tremble with a subtle rage. Why is there so much hatred being directed towards me? I didn't do anything wrong, she thought, her eyes narrowing to fight back tears. Her fingers twitched. I want to give it to him. Bad luck. So much bad luck. She closed her eyes and began to imagine a black mist being sucked into a box. Lock it up. Don't let it spread. She let out a shaky breath and bowed deeply. I apologize. And with that she ran, refusing to look back. Nanami held a small stone in her hand. She clenched it tightly, her knuckles turning white. Focus, focus. Get it all out. Don't leave even a drop left. She murmured to herself. She pictured the dark mist exiting from her body and being absorbed by the stone. Get rid of the bad luck. Get rid of it all and train. The rock cracked and she opened her palm. I wonder if this helps. She looked around. After meeting that boy in Endeavor, I don't think my heart can handle more bad luck. Nanami touched the grass, noting how wet it was from the earlier rain. She took a few steps back, inhaled, set the rock down, and ran. Ran through the grass, bracing herself in case she fell. She gulped and raised both arms. I can do it, she told herself. She jumped, rolling forward in the air and landing on her hands. She squeezed her eyes shut and pushed herself up back into the air. She straightened her legs and firmly planted her feet on the ground. She held her arms up, forming a V in the air. Her eyes widened and her heartbeat quickened. She had performed a successful front flip, something she hadn't done in 2 years. I did it. I didn't fall or anything. Filled with excitement, Nanami ran back to pick up the stone. She was so happy, she could almost forget what had happened earlier. She looked at the stone and began to walk, searching for a place to bury it. If it's absorbed my quirk, I should make sure no one will stumble across it until it wears off. She hummed a light tune as she decided to bury it under an old and Cricket Park bench. It seemed the safest option. Maybe I should do this on the day of the exam, she murmured as she began to dig into the damp dirt. After she was satisfied with the depth of the hole, Nanami carefully dropped the stone inside. After properly covering it up, she stood and went to find a place to wash up. She found a public washroom to use and quickly rid herself of the mud. Nanami looked in the mirror and found her hair was slightly more wild looking from the flip. Quickly, she tied it up into a sloppy and tiny ponytail with the spare scrunchie she kept handy. Nanami hummed in content as she walked, deciding it was a good idea to use the recreation center further downtown. It had high beams and the like, and it was well known for helping build muscle. Her mind began to wander to the pretty boy she met earlier. I wonder if he'll be going to UA. He must be talented if he's Endeavor's son. Remembering his cold eyes and frowned at the tight feeling in her chest. Why am I getting such a bad vibe? Is that boy safe with Endeavor? She shook her head firmly. Of course, he is. Endeavor may be scary, but he's still a hero. Of course, that boy is safe. She tugged at her long hair section, which she left untied. Why is this gnawing at me? The way he looked at him. And then there's that scar on his eye. It looks like it was definitely a burn mark. Could Endeavor have? Suddenly, she was at the train station, lost in her thoughts. She purchased a train ticket, kept walking, her head down as she tried to calm her nerves. Endeavor's eyes flashed in her head, and she felt goosebumps run all over her body. She wanted to ask the boy Shoto if he was okay. But her odds of seeing him again, unless she got into the school she wanted to be, were slim. Suddenly, she felt no ground under her foot. She yelped at the feeling of a large hand grabbing her hand and roughly yanking her back. She fell back into a firm, yet fragile feeling chest. Immediately after, a train zoomed past where she would have fallen if she hadn't paused. Her heart was beating frantically in her chest as she tilted her head back to look at the upside-down face of a blond man with deeply sunken-in eyes. He pulled her a few steps back, more gently this time. Be careful there, young lady. You almost got turned into a pancake. He scolded her lightly. Nanami's brain finally seemed to register what had happened. In her concern for the boy she had met earlier, she had nearly fallen onto the train tracks. She felt her knees shake as she turned to face the man. Bowing deeply, she shouted, "Thank you for saving my life, sir." He nodded and tilted his head. "May I ask what occupied your mind so much you didn't realize you were about to walk off the station lines?" he questioned. Nanami frowned and glanced at her shoes before looking up at the man. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to tell you." The bony stranger walked over to a bench and sat down. He patted the seat beside him and smiled. "We have time until the next train." They sat on the bench, Nanami holding a soda given to her by the man in hand. She was careful not to mention the hero in question's name, just that he was a man with an obvious fire quirk. The blond stranger folded his arms in thought after listening to her story. "Ah, so you were concerned over a stranger," he summed up. Nanami shook her hand frantically, shaking her can while doing so. "Why, yes, but he was my age, and it's just..." She glanced at her can, making a mental note to not open it for a while. "His father was so mean to me, and the boy looked so angry the second he spoke. There was just so much tension, hatred. I don't know. Their eyes were so cold. I know it isn't my place to butt in, but..." She pulled her hand to cover her left eye. There was this horrible scar on his face. "I can't help but notice that it looked like a burn," she further explained. She looked to the side and saw the gentleman had an awkward but gentle smile on his face. "Ah, I understand. You're concerned it's abuse?" he asked. Nanami nodded. He held his hand out to her. "Yagi Tashinori," he said, introducing himself. Nanami blinked and looked at his hand before taking it. "Why Yoshino Nanami?" Tashinori leaned back against the bench. "Yoshino Shoujo, I have to say, you're quite the interesting one. You seem to have quite the intuition there. By chance are you hoping to be a hero?" he asked. Nanami tugged on her hair, looking at her lap. "Yes, I'm applying for UA, but even though I'm training, I don't think I have much of a chance with my quirk." He tilted his head in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. She poked her fingers together. "My quirk is called misfortune. Basically, I bring bad luck everywhere I go. I can pass it on to people or objects at will, but sometimes it leaks out without me meaning to. Her eyes softened. Remember those boys who got involved in the slime monster incident? Toshinori nodded, recalling when he saved the two boys as All Might. Ah yes, that was a month or two ago, wasn't it? He asked, feigning ignorance. Nanami's eyes softened. It was my fault, I'm positive. Toshinori sat up, a frown planted on his skeleton-like face. Earlier, maybe just 20 or 30 minutes ahead of time, I had touched both of them, and even though I didn't mean to, I think my quirk got passed on to them. It can't be a coincidence that they both got into trouble not long after they met me, she muttered. She looked at him, smiling softly. I'm not giving up, but when things like this happen, it makes me doubt how I could become a hero. Let alone get into UA. A quirk like this is more fitting of a villain. It's a curse. She couldn't help but wonder why she was opening so freely to this gentleman. It was just so easy. Toshinori smiled and shook his head. Don't say things like that, Yoshino Shoujo. Your quirk is only as useful as you make it. Maybe there's more to it. He patted her head, catching her off guard. You have the heart of a hero, my girl. I think you'll do just fine if you learn to manage that quirk. He chuckled. He removed his hand from her head, smiling. Go ahead and apply to UA. Once they see that heroic spirit of yours, I'm sure you'll pass. A hero is strong in more than just physical strength. It's all about heart, and you've got plenty of that. He stood up. And don't blame yourself for that incident. Who knows, something good may have come out of it. Nanami touched her hand to her head before smiling a little. She stood at the side of the train. Ajisen, I apologize if this sounds rude. But are you a teacher? I've never spoken so casually to a stranger before. Cringing at the term Ajisen, Toshinori smiled a little. I actually just accepted my first teaching job, so I suppose you could say I am. Nanami smiled and bowed to him. I appreciate your kind words. I will do my best to get into you, even with this disadvantage I have. She stood up and waved to him, setting her soda in her bag and boarding the train. Nanami nodded her head in another small bow, watching as he waved to her with an obvious smile on his bony face. Right, I can't give up. Heroes don't give up. Looking up at the bars on the train, she puckered her lips and grabbed onto it. Despite the odd looks she was receiving from other passengers, Nanami began doing half chin-ups on the subway. Her upper body strength still seemed to need work. Shift POV Toshinori. Toshinori let his hand sit on his lap. He watched as the ash blonde continued to wave to him as the train left, before catching a glimpse of her grabbing onto the high bars in the train. He looked at the sky. It looked ready to rain. He stood up and dusted off his pants, nodding to himself. Well now, if I hadn't already chosen Midoriya Shounen as my successor, honestly that young lady would have been quite the candidate. He chuckled as he waited for his train. Though, if it really was thanks to her quirk that we met, I suppose All Might will have to thank her one day. He closed his eyes with a smile. I believe that child is what they call a diamond in the rough. Nanami counted in her head as she swung on the high beam in the recreation center. After completing 3 full circles, she let go, twisting in the air and landing on her feet, stumbling forward slightly before standing up straight. She rubbed the back of her head sheepishly at the applause she was given by her parents. Her mother wheeled over to her, her father close behind. Nanami, that was an excellent landing, she said in praise. She held her daughter's bottle up to her. You've really improved your control there. Nanami smiled as she took it, looking at her mother gratefully. Honestly, I never would have thought about using gymnastics to pursue my hero goal. I have to thank you for this, Mom. She dug through her pockets and pulled out a small stone. And I'm definitely thanking you for this, Dad. She looked at her father. Well, You were so excited when you told us about pouring your bad luck into a rock. I thought this would help. I even got it blessed at the shrine so that it can absorb more. Yeah, I appreciate that. She held the stone in the air. Its blue color changed to a vibrant purple as the sun passed through it. It's pretty too, she sighed happily. So, how long does your bad luck typically stay in there? Her father stopped mid-sentence when a ball bopped his daughter on the head. I see it's already coming back. Huh. Nanami was crouched onto the ground, holding her head in pain. Oh, Nanami tied her shoes, making sure to double knot them. She was 1 block away from the school of her dreams. She couldn't afford to let her training be wasted. She looked straight ahead, ignoring the fear of her quirk getting her lost. Tightening her scarf slightly, she spotted a familiar head of unruly green hair. She ran up to him with excitement and slapped his back in greeting. Izuku, she squealed. Midoriya stumbled forward a bit before looking back at her and smiling. Yoshino Nanami-san, are you ready? He asked, his smile wavering at his little mix-up. Nanami clenched her fists with determination. Definitely. I've been building up muscle, and I fall a lot less even with my quirk. These last 10 months were definitely not wasted, she squealed. Midoriya blinked at her enthusiasm. Same here. Is it me, or are you a lot more upbeat than usual? He asked, tilting his head. I'm almost envious. Nanami shook her head. Of course not. It's because it's Izuku. I can only talk to you like this, she explained, frowning as if it were obvious. When we talk I just feel fired up, she smiled brightly. I would get discouraged, and then I'd be like, Izuku wouldn't give up. Then I just keep going. She turned to face an empty space in the crowd. It's because of you inspiring me to train that I can do this. She ran forward and did a triple front flip, making sure to avoid her skirt falling as she did so. Landing with her feet together, she turned to him expectantly. Midoriya watched in amazement, his cheeks pink from the constant praise. Geez, now I'm getting excited too, he smiled confidently at his companion. This is it, our first steps to becoming heroes. Watch me take it. Nanami nodded eagerly, before paling as she watched Midoriya trip over his own foot. Or just watch me die, he thought in shame. Nanami closed her eyes, anticipating the thud sure to come when Midoriya hit the ground. When it didn't come, she peeked one eye open to see Midoriya panicking, as he floated just above the ground. She watched as a brunette girl gently set him down. Sighing softly, she quickly walked up to her curly-haired friend. That's my quirk. I hope you don't mind me using it without permission. But it'd be unlucky if you fell. The girl chirped cheerfully. Nanami felt an invisible arrow shoot through her at the word unlucky. The girl smiled and looked at the school. Isn't this exciting? She asked. Nanami cringed at the sight of her friend struggling to form words in response to the bubbly girl. Well, let's do our best. See ya? She waved and walked away. She brushed shoulders with Nanami, quickly apologizing as she continued. Nanami stepped closer to the green-haired boy. Izuku, are you okay? Sorry, you probably fell because of my, she began. Midoriya trembled before excitedly turning to her. Did you see that? I talked to a girl, he exclaimed. Nanami deadpanned, her lips puckered in distaste. Does he not remember that I'm a girl? Not only that, but he also didn't even say anything, though he looks happy. I'll just keep this to myself. Doing her best to hide her disappointment, she nodded in acknowledgement of his excitement. You sure did, interact with her. Nanami shuffled through the auditorium, looking at the numbers on the seats. She was number 7112 and found herself seated next to a handsome, yet stern-looking boy with glasses. She looked around and was amazed to see all the students that had applied. She saw some interesting characters passing by her, but made no effort to converse. She locked eyes with a tired-looking boy. She tilted her head as she found his wild purple hair reminded her of someone. She smiled nervously as he stared at her. Before continuing on his way, she hesitated before fiddling with her card. It read Area C. As the auditorium was filled, the lights shut off. Nanami rubbed her eyes at the sight of Present Mike, the voice hero. She could faintly hear Midoriya and Bakugo talking a few rows behind her. Her shoulders loosened as she found a silent comfort, knowing the green-haired boy was close by. Not Bakugo, though. She still owed him a coat. She was listening to the hero standing ahead when the boy sitting beside her suddenly stood up and raised his hand. She found his long question about the number of faux villains to be unnecessary, as it was likely to have been answered had he just been patient. It was when he turned back to face Midoriya that she became concerned. In addition, you with the curly hair. You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting. If you are simply here for leisure, I urge you to leave immediately. Nanami scowled as she watched Midoriya apologize, panicked at being the center of attention. This guy, what's his deal? Izuku was still pretty quiet, and he's distracted by that. Is he a bully or something? Her scowl deepened as she considered giving the loud boy bad luck. No, Nanami. I'm sure he's just uptight. She sighed and continued to focus on what was being said. She tugged on her hair, finding herself uncomfortable sitting next to him. She watched as those around her stood as the presentation was over. She glanced at the boy beside her, debating as he began to leave. She inhaled before closing her eyes tightly and grabbing his sleeve. He stood stiff as he turned to her. Can I help you? He asked. Nanami stared at her hand in disbelief, before quickly letting go. Confrontation is so terrifying. But I want to stand up for Izuku, she thought timidly. She looked up at the stiff standing gentleman. I want you to apologize to my friend, she stammered out quietly. The boy frowned. Excuse me, do you mean the curly-haired boy? Nanami nodded a little. What you did was, it was mean and you unnecessary. Her face burned with anxiety as she continued. Heroes can't expect. She heard her heart beat loudly in her chest as she continued. They can't expect a controlled environment. As so for you to get distracted by Izuku's muttering shows how you'll be in wilder situations. She clenched her fists. And why you were way more distracting too. So you should apologize, she exclaimed. The boy stared at her with wide eyes. For a moment, Nanami found herself intimidated by his intense stare. He lifted his arm up high in an odd, robotic fashion. Nanami closed her eyes, bracing herself for what looked to be an incoming smack. Instead, she found the boy to be politely holding his hand out to her. What is your name? He asked. Nanami blinked. Without taking his hand, she cautiously replied. Yoshino Nanami. Yoshino Nanami, I am Ida Tenya. The things you have said were very persuasive. If that boy with the unkempt hair does well in the exam, I shall thoroughly apologize. He nodded firmly to her, before taking his leave. Nanami found herself feeling envious of the young man's energy. Shaking her head, she made her way to the bus that took her to her assigned zone. Nanami held a broken pipe she had found in frustration. She watched all the robotic villains tear the fake city apart. She had gained 10 points by smashing gaps in the one-pointers with her bad luck-infused pipe. But there was little doubt that the people surrounding her were way ahead of her. How do they expect people with a terrible quirk like mine to be noticed? She whimpered as she ran. I can't imagine how Izuku is doing. She spotted a 3-pointer and tugged her hair. There was no one else around. This was her chance. Nanami ran up to the robot and jumped up when it slammed its arm towards her. She flipped onto its back and held onto it. Carefully, she poured her misfortune into it. The robot attempted to fling her off, stumbling backward as it did so. Nanami held on tightly as she grabbed her pipe and jammed it into its red eye. She tightened her grip as it began to stumble towards a fallen line, practically dripping with electricity. Her eyes widened and she jumped off, failing to take her pipe with her. The three-pointer fell and quickly short-circuited. 13 points. She looked at her pipe, still wedged in the robot's eye. No doubt touching it now would electrocute her. Shoot. Now, what am I going to do? She cursed at herself. Did you need that pipe? A voice asked. Nanami turned around to see a friendly-looking boy with blonde hair, with a notable black stripe in it. She tilted her head and looked at him before back at the pipe. She frowned, before nodding with a sigh. My quirk isn't good for this kind of enemy. I need it, but I'll get, she muttered. She watched as the boy walked up to the robot. Hey wait, you'll get electrocuted. The boy quickly pulled the pipe out, jumping back at the sparks that flew upon doing so. Don't worry, this isn't something that bothers me too much. He walked up to her and placed the pipe in her hand. Here you go. How about after this we get some lunch? Seems fair since I helped you right. Nanami blushed at the sudden invitation before suddenly looking up and shrieking. She quickly launched herself at the boy, pushing him out of the way of some large fallen debris. She sat up as she looked back and saw how bad the damage was. It wasn't an understatement to say the giant rock would have badly injured them. I like your enthusiasm, but now isn't really the time for this. Besides, I'm pretty sure there are cameras everywhere. Nanami blinked and looked down. She blushed deeply upon realizing she was basically straddling this complete stranger. She shrieked and jumped off of him, grabbing her pipe and running away despite his protests. How embarrassing. I hope my parents don't find out about that. She held her pipe tightly and shook her head. Focus, Nanami. Only a few minutes left, and you only have 13 points. Unlucky 13, she told herself. She looked around and paled, realizing a majority of the robots had been claimed. She ran, desperately searching for even one more robot. 2 minutes left, Present Mike's voice echoed out. Nanami's eyes widened as she began to look more frantically. None. There were no untouched robots to be seen. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. She jumped at the sheer force of the quake. And then, she looked up. A large robot that easily towered over the buildings. The obvious zero-pointer. Nanami nearly dropped her pipe at the sight of it. The beast lifted its arm and let out a terrifying sound as it slammed its fist to the ground. The ground shook again, violently enough that Nanami and many others were thrown into the air along with large chunks of debris. She landed ungracefully on her side, scraping her hand in the process. Many students screamed and ran from the monster. She got up to do the same, hissing in pain. She made it only a few steps before she heard it. My leg is caught. Nanami stopped and turned around. She saw the tired-looking boy from earlier. He was caught under the debris. His leg was painfully pinned under a number of large rocks. Nanami looked around waiting for one of the others with a stronger quirk to help him. However, they all were too busy running from the slowly approaching zero-pointer. She cursed under her breath. Looking down at her pipe, she growled and ran up to him. Hey, are you okay? I'll get you out, I promise. In a secluded surveillance room sat many heroes. All Might. Neither of the two you're watching seems to be doing particularly well. A mouse-like creature observed. Just wait, Principal Nezu. There's something special about those two. Toshinori murmured in amusement. He watched as his successor jumped into the air, attacking the zero-pointer to save a young girl. One has an unmatchable sense of self-sacrifice. Nezu sipped his tea as he watched the display. He found himself cheering for the boy. He turned to look at another of the many screens. He saw the rather unremarkable by comparison display of Nanami trying to pull the boy from the debris. And the other? He asks quizzically. Toshinori smiled. Her tuition is on point. But I would like to see what she does in this kind of situation. Nanami groaned as she fell back from trying to pull him out. Just get out of here. That thing is almost here. I'll be fine. They'll stop it before it steps on me for sure. Besides, you don't even know me," the tired-looking boy insisted. Nanami shook her head and jammed her pipe under the large rock pinning him. She attempted to pry it off of him. "You're hurt. What kind of hero would I be if I left you? It doesn't matter if I know you or not," she grunted as she pushed down on the pipe. NGH, her hand stung in pain from when she fell earlier. "Damn it. Misfortune. Why does it have to be misfortune? Why couldn't I have a useful quirk?" she cried out as her hand bled onto the pipe. The wild-haired boy's eyes widened. "Your quirk is called misfortune," Nanami growled as she tried to pull her weight down onto the pipe. "Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? I bring bad luck wherever I—" Suddenly Nanami stopped. Her mind felt blank as she loosened her grip on the pipe. "Run away," was the simple command that rang in her head. Nanami let go of the pipe, turned around, and sprinted away from the pinned boy. "Why am I running? Where am I going? My body won't listen to me. He needs help. Turn back. Stop. Stop," she thought to herself furiously. "What's wrong with me? Stop." The boy watched, sighing as he waited for the robot to stop. He winced as the shaking from its footsteps shook the rubble and further pinned his possibly broken leg. He watched the girl's retreating figure. His eyes widened when she tripped over nothing with a solid thud. He cursed to himself as he watched her look around before locking eyes with him. "What just?" Nanami muttered. She looked at her hand and flexed it. She was back in control. She looked at the 0-pointer. It was still far, but was closing in. Nanami looked at the pipe that was wedged at an angle under the rock. She scowled and got up and began digging through her pocket. She pulled out her stone and focused as much bad luck into it as possible. She set it down and took a few steps back. She ran forward, arms raised. Falling into a cartwheel, she ignored the stinging pain in her hand and sighed. Using her momentum, she transitioned into front flips. She kept her eyes on the pipe. "This will take a lot of precision and luck. I'm terrible with both of those things. But still," she thought desperately. She planted her hands firmly on the ground and launched herself into the air. She tucked her legs into her chest as she aimed her body. "I will definitely save you." Sticking both legs out, she slammed all her weight down onto the pipe, effectively lifting the rock enough for the boy to crawl out. She stumbled off of it and looked at him. His sweats were torn on his legs, and there was a nasty bruise on his left one. Her eyes widened. "That worked. I saved someone." She looked at his leg and cringed at the sight of the injury. "That looks bad. Can you walk?" she asked tenderly, helping him stand. She wrapped on his arms around her shoulder to further support him. Yeah, I guess," he muttered. "Do you have a lot of points? Is that why you came back?" he asked, rubbing his free hand against the back of his neck. Nanami bit her lip and looked to the side, a nervous smile on her face. Yeah, totally. I'm practically a shoo-in." The lie was obvious, and she knew it. She turned to look at him, before smiling sheepishly. "Let's not worry about that, okay?" She walked him over to her stone, picking it up and setting it in her pocket. "And 10 times up." Nanami walked into the waiting room. Her hand had been properly bandaged by Recovery Girl, though she declined treatment for her side and was left with a nasty bruise. She carried a tray to a table where the wild-haired boy, who later introduced himself as Shinso Hitoshi, was waiting. "Has Recovery Girl seen you yet?" she asked as she set down a cup of tea. Shinso looked at the cup she placed in front of him and shook his head. "No, she's currently working her way around. She'll be with me soon, though." "Are you waiting for a friend, Yoshino?" he asked. She nodded as she looked around, searching for an empty seat anywhere other than with him. "You can sit here if you want, I guess." Nanami laughed nervously and began fiddling with her stone. "That's probably not a good idea. You might get even more hurt just by sitting with me. Remember, misfortune. It's a terrible quirk that's probably more fit for a villain, you know," she chuckled dryly. Quickly contradicting herself, She pulled out the chair and wordlessly sat down next to him with a blank stare. After a moment, she relaxed her shoulders and began anxiously looking around. Wait, what? What just? My quirk is brainwashing. If you reply to me, I can make you do anything I want. He rested his elbow on the table and leaned his head against his hand. That's what I call a terrible quirk fit for a villain. He took his cup of tea and took a sip. But I still want to be a hero. You're the same, right? He asked. Nanami hesitated before nodding her head yes. He smiled a dry and tired smile. It's all right. I'm not going to use my quirk on you again. I guess I feel a kinship with you. Sorry. I just wanted to show you your quirk isn't the worst around. Nanami tilted her head and looked up at the ceiling. I think your quirk is cool. It would be so helpful in a hostage situation. She smiled at him. I'm still trying to figure out how my quirk will be useful. But if I, by some miracle, make it in, I'll learn how to use it productively. Shinso stared at her, before looking away and rubbing his neck. You're surprisingly positive about this. Without warning, a third chair was pulled over, and a solid thud was heard as a head met the table. Nanami jumped and scooted closer to Shinso to make room. She tilted her head and poked the side of the person who had placed themselves next to her. Izuku, are you all right? She asked. Midoriya looked up at her, an unreasonable amount of tears flowing from his eyes. 0 points. Nanami-san, I don't think I can keep our promise, he cried. Nanami cringed and patted his fluffy head, though found there was too much volume for her to feel his head under her hand. It was worth a shot, Izuku. Honestly, they really didn't consider their quirkless applicants when they made this exam, did they? She sighed. Shinso narrowed his eyes at the sight of Izuku tensing. About that, my quirk did manifest, finally, but I couldn't use it right, and I still ended up with a big fat 0. He dropped his head onto the table again, causing Nanami and Shinso to jump, as the thud from this drop was much harder than the previous. There are other hero schools. If you have a quirk now, you stand a better chance, right? What about Shiksu High? I heard they're pretty comparable to UA, she offered. Midoriya peeked at her before looking down at the table. Oh, did you choose a different hero school? Shinso lifted his head from his hand, frowning. Did you only apply to UA? That's stupid. You should always have a backup plan. Midoriya groaned into his hands. But I promised Nanami we'd meet at UA. Wouldn't it make me a liar if I applied somewhere else? Nanami shrieked and grabbed him by the shirt. She furiously shook him, rocking his whole body back and forth. Are you insane? This is your future we're talking about. I wouldn't have gotten mad if you applied to another hero school. I don't even think other schools are accepting applications right now. I should have made the promise more vague. She let him go and put her hands to her cheeks in horror. Oh God, what if it's my fault? I shouldn't have slapped your back this morning. What if that's why you didn't get any points even with a quirk? No, it's not your fault, Midoriya exclaimed. I was too slow. If I was faster, this wouldn't have happened. I only have 13 points, Nanami cried. Shinso and Midoriya's eyes widened. What? They cried in unison. Nanami's eyes watered as she nodded her head. I was hoping you somehow did better than me, so at least one of us would get in. I'm sorry, Izuku, I failed you. She let her head fall onto the table. I'm a promise breaker. And she proceeded to wail into her arms. Oh no, please don't cry. I'm sorry, I should have tried harder. I broke the promise more than you. At least you got some points. I didn't get any at all. Midoriya wailed as he proceeded to cry into his hands. Shinso slowly sank down into his seat, trying to hide his face with his hands, as they received quizzical stares from other applicants and adults. Stuck at a table with 2 loudly crying teens, the tired boy just wanted to disappear. These 2 are exhausting. Izuku? Honey, are you okay? Why are you smiling at that fish? Izuku blinked and looked at his concerned mother. No, I'm okay. He proceeded to eat his food, sighing quietly. I'm just feeling a little guilty, you know? I got a 0 after just barely passing the written exam. Setting his fish down, he fiddled with his fingers. I promised Nanami-san, but I don't think I got in. Nanami, Yoshino, right? Is she your girlfriend? You talk about her a lot. Inko observed. Izuku snapped his chopsticks, looking at his mother with wide eyes. Oh, no, sorry. That may have been a rash assumption, she said awkwardly. Izuku blushed and stood up. She's not my girlfriend. She's just my friend that happens to be a girl. He tossed the broken chopsticks into the trash and got a new pair. It just bothers me. I finally have a quirk, and I might not even get to learn how to use it. Oh, Izuku. Inko walked up to her son, smiling as she took his face in her hands. It'll be okay. Even if you don't get into Yui, you'll always be my hero. She kissed his forehead and nodded assuringly. Now come finish your dinner. Izuku smiled a little and nodded. Yeah, thanks, Mom, he said softly. Nanami counted the yen in her wallet one more time before stepping into a clothing store. She was wearing the jacket given to her by Bakugo. She admittedly enjoyed the fireplace smell it gave off, and the extra space in it made her feel warmer and comfy. She walked around the store, looking for the original version of the coat. She looked around and frowned when she didn't see the color she needed. Whimpering, she walked up to an associate. With some hesitation, she tapped the person's hand. Excuse me, do you, She gestured to her jacket awkwardly. This jacket, in a dark yellow? She asked quietly. The associate, a young lady with a bob cut, leaned down to examine the jacket before smiling apologetically. Sorry, sweetie, we just sold the last one, and that color has been discontinued, she said. Upon seeing Nanami tear up and tremble, she quickly backtracked. We have a similar jacket in dark blue. How's that sound? Nanami looked at her wallet before nodding hesitantly. Okay, I think he'd look good in dark blue. The customer frowned and stood up straight. Is this for your boyfriend? Why are you so scared? Is he hurting you? She asked in concern. She looked around and whispered to her. Should I call the police? Nanami blinked and looked at her in shock. She shook her head and smiled in appreciation. No, thank you. You see, she held up her sleeve for the woman to see. This boy lent this to me when I was cold, and my mom accidentally washed it with a red shirt. So I promised to replace it. She hesitated. We aren't close, but he yells a lot, and I don't want him to be mad. She pursed her lips and looked at the jacket again. He's kinda scary, but I don't think he'd hurt me. Oh, the associate murmured. She nodded and smiled. What size do you need? Nanami turned around so she could look at the tag. Okay, I think we have one in this size in the back. Wait here, it'll be a bit. Nanami nodded with a smile, waiting for her to be out of sight. She quickly whipped out her phone. She selected Izuku's number and texted him. Izuku-kun. If I buy a different jacket than the one Bakugo-kun wanted, would he get angry with me? She waited for a response. Her phone pinged, and she opened the message. Izuku-kun? I don't think Kaken will explode you as long as you replace the jacket. But he probably will get mad at you and most likely will yell a lot. That's really all I can say for sure. With an apologetic clapping emoji. Nanami paled at this response. She was sweating bullets, tugging at her hair. Shoot. This is a new level of unlucky. Come on. Not even in the same color. Is he really only going to yell at me? She thought anxiously. She bit her bottom lip and looked up when the associate came back with the jacket. Nanami's tense shoulders quickly relaxed as she saw the new one. It was very similar to the old one, other than the color and a few extra pockets. Thank you. She looked at the tag and winced at the price. 23,000 yen. She went through her wallet and sighed. That's about everything I have. Is this the closest you have? The associate smiled apologetically. Sorry, it is. I asked my manager and managed to get you a 2,000 yen discount. But that's the best I could do. Nanami sighed and nodded. It's fine, I understand. I'll buy it. She bowed to the kind woman and walked towards the register and paid for the jacket. As she left, she looked into the bag and began thinking. I wonder if Izuku knows where Bakugo-kun lives. Nanami walked out of the store, sighing heavily. Izuku, do you know where Bakugo-kun lives? I want to give him the jacket quickly and get this over with. Izuku responded quickly with the address. Nanami quickly got directions and walked in the direction of the Bakugo residence. She kept her hand on her stone, pouring as much of her bad luck into it. She was going to face the most terrifying person she knew. She did not need any more bad luck. Shift POV. Mitsuki Bakugo hummed as she prepared a spicy curry for lunch that day. Her eye twitched at the sound of an explosion coming from upstairs. Damn it, Katsuki. Don't use your quirk in the house, she yelled in irritation. Oh, shut up, you hag. It wasn't on purpose, was the reply her son threw back at her. Mitsuki glared at the curry. That damn brat. If we weren't celebrating his getting into Yuyui, I'd make this curry freaking mild just to spite him. She sighed. Her husband, Masaru, chuckled at his wife's short temper. He read his newspaper and content. You know, you could just read the news on your phone, right? The newspaper is so old-fashioned. She commented. Maybe, but there's something satisfying about turning the physical page. He chuckled. The doorbell rang and he got up. Oh, maybe that's my package. I'll get it. He folded his paper, setting it to the side before getting up to answer. He looked through the peephole and was confused when he didn't immediately see someone. He opened the door and looked down to see a petite girl with hair the same color as his wife and son. Oh, hello. Did you need something? The young girl jumped and looked up at him. Is Bakugo-kun here? She asked timidly. She paused and looked at her shoes, tugging on her hair. Oh wait, I suppose everyone here is Bakugo-kun. That would be confusing. Katsuki-kun. Is he here? She asked. Masaru tilted his head. Just 1 second. The girl nodded, and he closed the door. Who is it? Mitsuki called from the kitchen. It's a girl. She's asking for Katsuki. He answered, sounding quite astonished. Mitsuki dropped the ladle she was using to stir the curry. A girl for Katsuki? Our Katsuki? She grinned a little when her husband nodded. She turned off the stove and ran over to the stairs. Katsuki, get down here. What for? I'm fucking busy. Watch your damn mouth and get down here. There's a girl asking for you. Shift POV. Nanami winced at the sound of yelling from the other side of the door. She attempted to pour more bad luck into her stone, but it seemed that she had little to none left at the moment. Though given her high stress levels at the moment, it would probably return to her quickly. The Bakugo residence was just as loud and intimidating as she expected. Nanami tugged at her hair and straightened out her skirt. Maybe I should have switched jackets. It would probably upset Bakugo-kun. She looked at the bag she had in hand and found herself sweating despite the cold temperature. I hope he likes this. She tensed when the door opened and a lovely young woman opened the door. Katsuki will be down in just a second. It's really cold. Why don't you come in? She offered politely. Nanami blinked, startled at the invitation, but nonetheless took her shoes off as she entered. She looked around at the house and was impressed by the stylish dynamic of the decor. She looked at the large bookshelf in the living room and was intrigued by the many fashion magazines and design books that lined the shelves. She glanced at the young woman who led her to the couch and offered her a cup of tea. Ito, Wanasan, is now a bad time. I can come back later, she offered meekly. Oh ho, Wanasan, huh? You're quite the flatterer, kid. I'll have you know, I'm Katsuki's mother. She laughed at Nanami's wide eyes. Oh, but of course, I won't stop you from calling me Wanasan. Haha, I actually would prefer it. Nanami smiled slightly at her friendly nature. What's your name, Shortstack? I'm Yoshino Nanami. She bowed her head. It's nice to meet you. Yoshino-chan then. Katsuki's father smiled as he sat on the opposite couch. Katsuki won't be long. Have some tea while you wait. He offered, motioning to the cup in front of her, while he picked up his newspaper. Mitsuki rubbed her hand through her wild hair. Damn brat never comes when you call him. He scoffed. Katsuki, you better hurry up, or I'll tell this nice girl that you're jerking off or something. Nanami's face flushed bright red as she nearly choked on her tea. Mitsuki, please, Masaru said awkwardly. Katsuki exploded down the stairs. What the hell is wrong with you? Don't yell something like that, you hag. He looked towards the living room, where Nanami's back was facing him. Who the hell is it anyway? Nanami slowly turned around to face him with a weak, teary smile. Hi Bakugo-kun. Katsuki's eyebrow twitched in recognition, and his shoulders sagged. Oh, it's you, Freckles. Nanami frowned. This didn't go unnoticed. Hey, didn't I tell you to stop calling people by their features? She'll hate you if you keep calling her that. Use her name. Mitsuki barked aggressively. He scowled at his mother before glaring hard at Nanami, trying to remember what Deku had called her. What was her name? Nana something. Nanako? Nanami? Shit, I don't even know her last name, do I? He grunted and lifted his chin up. Rather than risking getting her name wrong in front of his mother, he settled with, What do you want, Nana? He asked gruffly. Nanami flinched. Nana? She thought incredulously. You, She stood up, picking up the bag that rested beside her feet. She gulped and walked around the couch and up to him. She held the bag up to him at arm's length. It isn't the same, but it's still a nice one. They were out of the one I ruined, so I got this instead, she explained rather loudly. She pulled the bag back up, hiding the lower half of her face as she looked up at him with her doe eyes. It's a bit more expensive. I hope you'll still forgive me, she pleaded meekly. Katsuki stepped back when the bag was practically shoved into his face, only for it to be pulled away before he could grab it. He found this irritating, but was unable to yell at the blonde girl when she wore such a pathetic expression. He scowled and snatched the bag from her, pulling out the dark blue jacket and inspecting it. Mitsuki hummed in appreciation. Hey, Masaru, isn't that the brand of the company you work at? She didn't wait for an answer when she smacked Nanami's back. Gotta say, you've got good taste, kid. Nanami chuckled nervously at the praise, before cautiously turning to Katsuki. She couldn't tell by his expression if he liked the jacket or not, and it concerned her. Hesitating, she cleared her throat and spoke. Kakener, Bakugo-kun, she began quietly. Katsuki. He mindlessly corrected as he began to try the jacket on. He bent his arm in it slightly. An irk mark appeared on his head as he glared at her. What, are you deaf? It's fucking weird if I'm calling you by your first name and you're calling me by my last. And like hell am I letting you call me by that nerd's stupid nickname. Call me Katsuki, damn it, he roared. Nanami shrieked and nodded immediately. He huffed as he shoved his hands in his pockets. HMPH, I guess I'll accept this. He took it off and huffed. Fine, I accept your payment. You're off the hook. Is that all you're here for? Nanami pursed her lips. He seemed genuinely uninterested in anything else she had to say. She jumped when Mitsuki planted a firm smack on the back of his head. Your girlfriend came all the way here to give you an expensive gift, and all you say is that all you're here for? Where the hell is your tact? She pulled her son's cheeks irritably. Ask her to stay for dinner, you brat. Get off of me, you crazy hag. She isn't my girlfriend, goddammit, he yelled, only to be greeted by another smack. Oh, fuck, quit hitting me. Nanami had slowly inched towards the door. She had just placed her hand on the knob when a smoking hand placed itself firmly on her shoulder. She tensed and slowly turned her head to see Katsuki's overly angry face. You're staying for dinner, got it, he growled. Nanami whimpered and nodded. Why, yes, sir. She forced a nervous smile onto her face. No amount of luck manipulation could prepare me for this. Sakura hummed as she used her quirk to get rid of the weeds in the garden. The mail carrier smiled in greeting and handed her a couple of letters. She quickly locked her wheelchair and sorted through the letters in her lawn. Bill, junk, wait, what? Her eyes widened as she saw a distinctive seal on a letter. Why, Yuyui? She unlocked her chair and rolled inside. Hajime, where's Nanami? Hajime peeked from inside the kitchen as his frantic wife. Nanami is having dinner at her friend's house. What's the matter? She got a letter from Yuyui. Look. She held it up, pointing excitedly to the seal. There's a long silence before both parents scramble for their phones and immediately call their daughter. Shift POV. Nanami jumped at the dinner table as her phone vibrated violently. She blushed as all eyes were suddenly on her and sunk into her chair. Excuse me, she muttered. It's fine. Dinner isn't ready yet anyway. Masaru chuckled. Nanami bowed slightly and left the table. She stepped outside and took the call. Hello? Nanami, your test results came in. Her mother's excited voice boomed into her ear. Do you want to come home to read it, or do you want me to do it for you? Nanami hesitated. Putting her hand in her pocket to squeeze her stone, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Will you read it, Mom? Gotcha. She heard the ripping of the envelope and tugged her hair as she heard her mother's mumbling. Wow, what a long letter. Oh, here's your score. You got 13 battle points and 48 rescue points. Nanami, they're accepting you into Yuyui. Nanami dropped her phone, her eyes widening. She could hear her mother calling for her, and vaguely heard her father's voice in the background. Katsuki opened the door. Hey Nana, the food's done and the hag says we can't eat until you're done with your call. Wrap it up already. He frowned when she ignored him and picked up her phone. Mom, are you serious? I did? I actually got accepted? Really? She asked excitedly. It's not a dream, is it? Her father took the phone and answered. You got into Class 1A. Nanami, you're amazing. Nanami found herself squealing. Okay, I gotta go now, I'll call you back. She hung up. She clenched her fists and trembled excitedly. Oh my god. An irk mark popped from Katsuki's head. What the hell, don't you fucking ignore me. He grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. He winced at the sight of her crying. Hey, why are you always crying? You're as bad as Deku. Nanami, brimming with energy, jumped up and threw her arms around his neck, forcing him to bend forward so they wouldn't fall backward. His face turned bright red, and he looked down at her, standing up straight. This caused her to have to lean onto her toes as she basically hung from his neck. Katsuki, it's amazing. I got into the hero course at Yuyui, she squealed. Katsuki put his hands on her arms to pry her off when he heard her. Confusion spread all over her face. What? Wait, how? Aren't you? Oh, that's what the call was about. Congrats. You want some celebratory pudding? The two teens turned around to see Mitsuki leaning against the door. She put a hand to her mouth to emphasize her catty smile. Or should I wait for you lovebirds to wrap it up? Nanami blushed and met eyes with Katsuki. They looked at each other's arms, realizing they were basically in what looked like a lover's embrace. They turned bright red and pushed away from each other. We aren't lovebirds. I was just excited. She avoided Katsuki's gaze as she walked in and sat down. There was already a plate of curry ready for her. I was sure I wouldn't get in. Not with my terrible quirk. It really is a miracle. For fuck's sake, time out, Freckles. I thought you said you were quirkless. The hell are you doing? He demanded, hitting the table with a small explosion from across her. Nanami winced and shrunk back into her seat. Mitsuki yanked on her son's ear. Damn it, Katsuki. I told you no quirks in the house. And I said to use her name, or she's gonna hate you. Do your ears not work? She scolded. Masaru waved a wary hand. Careful now. Don't scare our guest, please. Quiet, you clown, he shouted at his father. Katsuki pushed her hand away, rubbing his now red ear. Who the hell do you think you are, lying to me like that? He shouted angrily. You said you were quirkless. Who lies about something so stupid? Nanami glared down at her lap, her cheerful mood ruined. I never said that. Why you assumed? She glared at him, her fists trembling under the table. All I said was I don't have a power that would make things easy. I'm not quirkless. I just have an inconvenient quirk. Mitsuki snickered. Katsuki, you jump to conclusions again? So uncool. She teased. Katsuki growled, and the table ate their dinner in silence. Nanami rubbed her chest. The spicy food, while delicious, was already giving her heartburn. She could feel it. She glanced to the side, uncomfortable at the sight of Katsuki walking beside her. Why are you walking me home? She asked timidly. The explosion-happy teen was already in a bad mood. She didn't want to make things worse by appearing annoyed. Oh, shut up. The hag would yell nonstop if I didn't take you home. I think it's stupid. He looked at his watch and grumbled. This is such a pain. Why the fuck did you agree to stay to eat? Nanami tugged her hair as she kicked a pebble on the sidewalk. Your mom is kind of scary. She's nice, but I thought she'd yell at me if I refused, she admitted. She paused before looking up at him. Katsuki-kun, deal. You don't hear me calling you Nana-chan. Just stick to Katsuki, he grumbled. Nanami nodded, making a mental note that he didn't like honorifics. Do you hate Izuku? She asked quietly. It's not my business, but I just don't understand why you're so mean to him when he doesn't really do anything to you. You're right. It isn't your business. He glared at her. Don't get the impression that we're friends. Got it, Freckles? He scoffed. Deku doesn't know his place, and it pisses me off. His place is beneath me, but he keeps trying to get ahead. A quirkless loser trying to be a hero makes no sense. What the hell could he do? Nanami frowned and tugged her hair in disagreement. This guy. Why on earth does he think like this? Her hand twitched with the lust to give him bad luck. No, talk him down. There's no need for quirks here. I say that, but I hope he feels the same way. She thought to herself. What gives you the right to decide that? She whispered cautiously. Katsuki frowned and grunted. Just because he didn't have a quirk. What gives you the right to decide what he can and can't do? She could feel herself getting riled up. Izuku tries so much harder than anyone I've ever met. And you're so privileged. She turned around and stood in front of him. You're a privileged bully. You're good looking, you have a strong quirk, and you probably get praised for everything you do. I bet you haven't worked hard for a thing in your life. Deku this, Deku that. If he is so beneath you, why are you so obsessed with him? She planted her hands on his chest and pushed him, making him stumble backward. Having a quirk isn't always such a great thing, you know. It doesn't guarantee automatic success. Katsuki growled. Grabbing onto her wrist, he dragged her into an alley. He slammed his hand beside her head. Nanami tensed at the scent of smoke from the side of her face. It's funny how you act all shy and cute when it turns out you actually have a big fucking mouth. Do yourself a favor and don't butt into other people's business, he growled. If you want to pick a fight, then let's fucking go. Don't think I'll go easy on you just because you're a girl. Nanami's body shook as his blood-red eyes pierced through her. I'm so scared. No, that's wrong. She glared up at him. I'm so mad. God, If I get out of this unscathed, I'll consider myself lucky. I want to be a hero, though. Heroes stand up to bullies. She reached one shaky hand and put it on his arm, squeezing it. Izuku is my friend. You bullying him is my business, she muttered. A bully, huh? Aren't you high and mighty? He smirked. I don't get why you're encouraging him so damn much. Deku doesn't have a quirk. He'd die on his first mission if he made it by some fucking miracle. You remember that stupid sludge incident, right? He ran in without a quirk like a fucking dumbass. The damn nerd doesn't know when to give up, and it's shit like that that pisses me off. If I don't put him in his place at the bottom of the food chain, no one fucking will. Nanami blinked. Her shoulders relaxed, as did her grip on his arm. Does he actually care, or does he have one hell of a superiority complex? To use the sludge monster incident, though, her expression softened. That's right. I never apologized for that, she whispered. Wait, what? No, it's nothing. She put her other hand on his arm, sliding them both down until holding onto his hand. Her expression was full of confusion. Hey, Katsuki, she began softly. Are you actually okay? Since that incident, I never got to ask you. Katsuki's expression morphed from one of rage to confusion. Ha, he looked at their hands and narrowed his eyes at her. The fuck? How short is your attention span? Freckles. Switching from talking about Deku, then moving over to me. An irk mark appeared on the back of Nanami's head. Don't ask stupid questions. What are you, the therapy hero now? He pulled his hand away from her. Nanami took this opportunity to slide away from the wall he had previously pinned her to. I wouldn't be surprised if you needed a therapist, she mumbled. She sighed and tugged at her hair. God, I tried to talk to you and figure you out, and I just ended up angry with more questions. She shoved her hands in her pockets. Don't try and figure me out. That's freaking weird, he grumbled as he walked past her. By the way, I got into class 102. He looked back at her, tilting his head upward in what Nanami would only describe as the cockiest, douchiest manner possible. This makes you my stepping stone. I'm going to be number 1, and you'll be stuck in my shadow. Nanami tilted her head. Why is everything a competition for you? She walked in front of him on her way to the house. I only want to become a pro hero. She looked back at him and smiled. And one day I'll rescue you, and you'll have to thank me. Because that nasty attitude of yours is going to get you in trouble one day. An irk mark appeared on his head as his hand crackled with little explosions. Oh, fuck off, Freckles, he scoffed. He walked beside her. He looked at the road and paused before grabbing her arm and pulling her to the inside of the sidewalk, further from the road. The fuck is your name again? Nanami tugged on her hair in annoyance. I can't really get mad. I didn't know his name for the first 2 months of knowing him. Yoshino Nanami. Too long. I'll stick to Nana, he muttered. Her eyebrow twitched. Why did he ask then? Nanami, decked out in her new Yu uniform, shrieked as she ran away from an angry dog in the early morning. Oh my God, this is why I'm a cat person. Someone help, she screamed as she kept running. The dog wasn't particularly large, but that didn't change the fact that it had teeth and an attitude. She bumped into a food stand, but kept running as the dog ignored the fallen food in favor of chasing her. I'm sorry. I promise I'll pay damages. People cleared a path as she neared Yuyui, many people opting to whip out their phone to record, rather than actually help the poor girl. The dog barked loudly, and she found herself running faster. Nanami looked around for a place to hide. Her eyes widened in when she saw she was on school grounds, and many students were staring at her, watching as she was running from this growling medium-sized terror. How humiliating. She looked around again and spotted a large tree. Here goes. She sped up and jumped up, grabbing onto a sturdy branch. She began swinging back and forth until she had enough momentum to lift herself onto the branch. She sat down and glared at the angry dog. Geez, I left early and everything. She looked at her hands and saw that the branch's rough bark had cut her up pretty badly. Ouch. She hid her hands under her armpits, hissing in pain. She glared down at the dog. Shoo, go away. I have to get to class. Izuku looked around the class in amazement. Wow, he quickly spotted two intimidating figures interacting closer towards the end of the classroom. Take your feet off that desk immediately, Ida demanded. Ha, Bakugo laughed. Did someone shove a stick up your ass? Or were you just born with one? Izuku groaned internally. I knew they'd be here, but I was still hoping there was a chance they'd be in different classes. Where's Nanami? She said she would be here. He looked around in search of his best friend. He was approached by Tenya Ida, who he determined was actually just uptight instead of scary. Hey, I recognize you. It's Falling Boy. Izuku turned around and blushed at the sight of the nice girl from the entrance exam. She immediately began speaking, getting close in an overly friendly manner, while he tried to remember how words worked. In the midst of it all, he missed the vibrations coming from his phone. Nanami stared at her phone, groaning as the dog below refused to leave, and Izuku wasn't picking up. She had even thrown a shoe at the damn thing, and it refused to leave her. Nanami looked around, her eyes softening as people walked past her. She pulled up her legs and hugged her knees, carefully balancing herself on the thick branch. What was I thinking? A hero that's scared of dogs. I'm going to be late, she thought solemnly. What are you doing up there? She heard someone ask. She looked down and saw a familiar head of purple hair. Did you seriously get chased up a tree by a dog? Are you a cat or something? He looked at the still barking dog. It chased me from all the way home, okay? Just get it away. Shinso, she cried pathetically. Shinso looked at the dog, which stopped barking to stare at him. He waved his hand, glaring at it. Shoo, get out of here. The dog tilted its head before looking at Nanami one last time and running away. An irk mark popped from the back of her head. If that isn't the biggest load of bull, she muttered under her breath. Do you need help getting down? Class will be starting soon, you know? He asked, a tired and somewhat mocking smile on his lips. Nanami grumbled in annoyance. She looked at her hands. They were blistered and bleeding slightly, but she should be able to get down. Yes, just a little. She moved towards the trunk of the tree. See, can you just not look up for a bit though? Even with tights under her skirt, she didn't want the boy looking up. Shinso blushed and looked away, rubbing his neck. Sure, whatever. He kept his eyes on the ground, waiting for her to be low enough that he could look up. She grunted, her hands beginning to lose their grip. He sighed, before putting his hands around her waist and gently pulled her down. Once her feet had touched the ground, he picked up her shoe and handed it to her. Thanks so much. Everyone kept going past me, or taking pictures, she grumbled as she put her shoe back on. I'm glad to see you got in. Are you in the hero course? She asked. Shinso scowled at nothing in particular. No, I'm in general studies. What? But that's not fair. Your quirk is so useful. Nanami half whined. She sighed and looked at her phone. Eek, I've got to go. She looked back at him and smiled. Next time I see you, let me get your number sometime, okay? She quickly ran off, leaving Shinso to himself. She's so exhausting, he found himself muttering. Nanami quickly saw Izuku and puffed out her cheeks in irritation. Walking up to him, she tugged on his backpack, startling him out of his conversation. He looked back at her and smiled. Nanami, he flinched at the pouty glare he received. Ah, did I do something? He asked. You ignored my texts? I really needed you. Izuku blinked and looked down at his phone, seeing 4 missed texts from his phone. Izukun HLP dog CH Sing in Skialyard. It chased me up a tree. It stole my shoe. If I die in this tree, please plant a carnation bush at the base with a nice memorial. Also, please give all of my good luck charms to the local cats. Izuku furrowed his brows at the last one. Fighting the urge to laugh, he nodded. Sorry, Nanami. I wasn't paying attention to my phone. He apologized. You got down though, so that was pretty lucky. Nanami tensed up and found herself shuddering. Don't say lucky, you'll jinx me. She smiled a little and ruffled his fluffy hair with both hands. I can't stay mad at you. You're much too cat-like. Ah, I take it you two know each other already. Such informality. Ida stated, humming in interest. Izuku bent down slightly, allowing Nanami better access to his hair, which she began to pet more upon realizing there were other people around. At some point, it had become a habit of hers. It seemed to calm her, and to be honest, he preferred her petting his hair than pulling on her own. Not to mention, it didn't necessarily feel unpleasant. Her timidity had resurfaced as she spoke to Ida. He's my best friend. She hesitated and found herself scowling up at him. Did you ever apologize to him? Yes, of course, Ida said stiffly. Oh, you mean about earlier? Yeah, he was pretty upfront about it. Izuku laughed. He lifted his head and smiled a bit. If you're here to make friends, then leave. They heard an annoyed and sleepy voice call from behind. The students turned to see what appeared to be a caterpillar man. In reality, it was just a bum in a sleeping bag. He grumbled as he got out of the bag and sucked on what looked to be an applesauce pouch. A single thought ran through everyone's heads. What is that thing? Nanami tugged at her hair, finding herself losing her mind. Whoever does the worst will get expelled. She closed her eyes tightly. My quirk isn't suited for this. She found herself trembling as the events passed. Nana, what the fuck are you doing? Katsuki grunted. Nanami looked behind her, seeing the explosion boy glaring daggers at her. Me. Nothing, just trying to keep my composure. She waved her hands as if she were attempting to mime a shield. Please ignore this humble stepping stone. I don't think I can handle you scaring me right now, Katsuki. Katsuki glared at her, taking a hold of her hair and tugging it, making her wince. Don't mock me, Freckles. He scoffed. He looked at their teacher, Aizawa. That asshole is just trying to scare you. Like he's seriously going to expel someone on the first day. He paused before smirking and motioning to Deku, who was doing the long jump as they spoke. And if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be that quirkless loser over there. So you'll survive by default. Nanami scowled and kicked the back of his knee. Don't say things like that. She scolded. Katsuki was forced to bend as she kicked him, grunting. What the hell? Is that the thanks I get for trying to cheer her up? He thought angrily. He was getting ready to explode the attitude-ridden blonde when what she said. Izuku has a quirk, you pompous jerk, she grumbled. I don't know how, but it manifested sometime before the exam. I don't know what it's like, but I bet it's great. She huffed. What? He asked. She looked at him. Izuku has a quirk. A quirk good enough to get into Class 1A, she looked at her friend. Maybe his quirk is something he can only show off with a certain test. What the hell? He shouted. He leaned down, getting into her face, his hands smoking threateningly close to her hair. If he had a quirk, he would have gotten it when we were kids. But it's not medically impossible, you know? He smirked and grabbed the long section of her hair between his thumb and index finger. If I find out you're lying, Freckles, I'll burn a bald patch into your hair. Nanami shrieked and put her hands on her hair, stepping back. Don't do that. My hair is my most attractive feature, she shrieked. Bakugo scoffed and put his hands on his hips. You're serious then, Nana? He grumbled. That nerd has a quirk now. But you've never seen it. How do you know that twerp isn't lying just to get your attention? He flicked her forehead. Nanami covered her head irritably. Well, I guess we'll just find out then, won't we, Katsuki? She huffed. Yoshino, if you're done flirting, it's your turn. Aizawa called in annoyance. The two teens blushed and glared at each other. Nanami huffed and ran towards the long jump. She hesitated, looking around before taking a few steps back. She quickly jumped onto her hands and propelled herself just past the sand. She heard the machine take a picture. Not bad, she smiled to herself, pleased with her jump. Does that count, Aizawa-sensei? He folded his arms in thought, before giving her an unenthusiastic thumbs up. Nanami sighed in relief. She ran towards Izuku, only to trip over nothing. Just as she was getting up, a foot found itself on her head. Eek! It quickly removed itself. Ah, it seems I'm always stepping on you. Are you okay? Nanami refused to look up, as she could feel the stares from her other classmates on her, and she could hear Katsuki's laughter. She sighed heavily into the sand and waved her hand. Why don't you just let me die in my shame for a bit? Similarly to before, her hand was grabbed, and she was lifted off the ground. Sorry, you're still lighter than you look. He lowered her so that her feet touched the ground. She sighed and dusted herself off, before looking up at him in amazement. It's you, Sho. She put her hand to her chin, puckering her lips in thought. I'm sorry, what's your name? We never introduced ourselves the first time you stepped on me. My apologies. I'm Todoroki Shoto. Do you need some ice for your head? He offered. No, I'm good. She looked at their hands and quickly took hers back. I keep ending up holding this pretty boy's hand. She cleared her throat. Yoshino Nanami. She hesitated as she looked at his scar. She cleared her throat. Would you, Her face turned bright red as she tried to search for an ethical way to ask about his father. And never mind, she quickly ran off, covering her face in humiliation as she approached Izuku. Are you okay, Nanami? He asked. Are you hurt? He touched her head, feeling for any bumps on where she was stepped on. I guess not. Nanami planted her forehead in his shoulder, panic clear in her voice. Arg, I'm so awkward. Izuku blushed and raised both arms as if to avoid touching her. You aren't the only one. Nanami hummed thoughtlessly as she did the seated toe touch, pushing the measuring stick all the way back. Wow, Yoshino-san, you're pretty flexible. Nanami looked to the side to see Gyro, who only managed to push the stick a little further past her toes. Were you a cheerleader or something? Nanami blushed, accidentally bending the stick. No, she sat up, giving the stick to an annoyed-looking Aizawa. Sorry, I bent it. Whatever, flexibility isn't a bad thing. He took the item from her and went to fetch another one. Nanami looked at the earphone jack girl, tilting her head. I'm not peppy enough to be a cheerleader, she admitted. But I learned gymnastics a couple of years ago and picked it back up so. That could be helpful in a fight, couldn't it? You could jump around and dodge. Gyro hummed. By the way, I don't think I've seen you use your quirk yet. Is it like that Midoriya guys, and you're just waiting for an opportunity? She asked, standing up and dusting herself off. No, she muttered. My quirk is, not suited for these kinds of things. She looked at her with a small smile. But I think I'm doing better since the ball throwing section. She had poured as much of her bad luck into the ball and threw it as hard as she could. By the way, is that Todoroki guy bullying you? She pointed towards the bi-colored haired boy. I heard you say he stepped on you before. That's pretty rude. You should tell a teacher. Nanami squeaked and waved her hands frantically. No. It's a misunderstanding. He didn't mean to. That was my quirk, she exclaimed in a panic. Besides, each time he apologized immediately. Your quirk made him step on you. She blushed when she heard it repeated to her. Tugging gently on her hair, she looked at her shoes. My quirk is misfortune, so if anything unlucky can happen to me, it will. Oh, so it really wouldn't help in this situation. I suppose Aizawa-sensei might consider that. The raven-haired girl smiled a little. Well, if it helps, you're pretty fit, so you should do fine. Nanami's cheeks burned at the compliment. Thanks. Gyro grinned mischievously. She leaned in and whispered to her. So if you don't mind me asking, are you and Midoriya a thing? She looked back at the freckled boy before returning to her. You're pretty affectionate towards him. Plus, that was quite the display when you practically hugged him in front of everyone. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head no. No, of course not, she laughed. Izuku is my best friend. If anything, he's more of a brother to me. That's all, really. She trailed off in thought. She looked back at Gyro and smiled softly. Besides, she looked over and saw him speaking to Uraraka. He seems to have his eyes on someone else. Gyro frowned a little. Well, that's disappointing, she sighed. Huh, why? Oh, nothing, don't worry about it. Nanami walked up to Izuku, taking his hand and inspecting his finger. I'm glad the tests are over, but your poor finger must be killing you, she mumbled. Ouch. You really did just recently get your quirk. Yeah, I'll have Recovery Girl take a look, he sighed. I just hope I don't get expelled. I want to learn how to use my quirk. Look alive. Here are your results. You're being rated from best to worst. There's no sense in going over it all individually. Nanami looked at the holographic graph, tugging on her head in terror as she kept looking down for her name. Whoever gets the lowest score will get expelled. Where am I? Where's my name? Then she spotted it. She was beneath Hagakure, and below her was Minta. Her eyes trailed down and she gasped. She looked over to Midoriya. He was last. The green-haired boy looked on in horror. Nanami cautiously waved her hand in front of his face. She clenched her fists and stood up straight. Wait here, she muttered, moving forward. Midoriya grabbed her wrist. What? Nanami, what are you going to do? She looked back at him angrily. What are you talking about? I'm going to tell him to expel me instead. You deserve to be here more than I do. She pulled her wrist free and kept walking. Aizawa Shoda, no, Eraserhead. You're my favorite hero. But Izuku is my favorite person. She steeled herself. She straightened her back, her strides wide and determined. Aizawa-sensei. By the way, no one is getting expelled. He called out. He smiled dryly. That was just a tactful deception to boost morale and make sure everyone would do their best. Nanami stopped, stumbling forward to catch herself, only for Katsuki to grab her arm and prevent her from falling. Nanami looked back at him, an irk mark popping from her head at the sight of him rolling his eyes. Yoshino, were you about to say something? Aizawa asked uninterestedly. Nanami flinched and stumbled backward, quickly hiding behind Katsuki. She placed her hand on his shoulder as she peeked out. Ahaha, I didn't say anything, Aizawa-sensei, she called out, whimpering. I almost got myself expelled for nothing, didn't I? Pathetic, Katsuki muttered. Nanami smiled when Aizawa passed Izuku a note to see Recovery Girl. She sighed quietly and rested her forehead onto Katsuki's back in relief. Thank goodness, she whispered to herself. Katsuki looked back at her in annoyance, before looking away and huffing. That damned nerd. Something about this just isn't right, he thought angrily. He zoned in on Izuku, his eyes narrowing in fury. And I'm going to figure out what. Nanami puckered her lips in conflict as she looked at the hair straighteners on display. She and her mother were doing some early morning shopping before her second day of school. She wasn't particularly pleased about the reason why, though. She looked towards her mother, who was a few feet away, looking at perfume. Mom, is straight hair a more popular look for girls? Sakura looked over at her. A sly smile painted across her face. Maybe, but I love your curly hair. Why? Trying to impress a boy at school? She asked coyly. Nanami blushed deeply and began laughing unnecessarily loudly. Ha ha, you're funny. No, She touched her hair. I thought maybe it'd be easier to make friends if I had straight hair like the other girls, she admitted quietly. I can't say it's because I think Izuku would like it. Sakura chuckled to herself. Remember, sweetness, we're buying a gift for your grandmother. If you really want one, I'll buy you a straightener next time. Nanami tensed, before looking down at her shoes. Does she have to stay in our home? She muttered. Can't she just go to a hotel? Nanami, I know your grandmother makes you nervous for some reason, but she loves you just as much as your father and I do. It's just for the weekend. She sprayed perfume on her wrist and smelled it. This is nice. Nanami sighed and ruffled her curly hair. I'm going to go get a snack or something. After a quick note of approval from her mother, Nanami walked away as quickly as she could. She sighed sadly, her eyes stinging as she tried to fight tears. She wiped her eyes and kept walking. She sighed heavily and smacked her cheeks, startling some people around her. I wonder if I can stay at a friend's house, she murmured to herself. Her eyebrow twitched. My only friend is a boy, and I don't think I'm close enough with Gyro-chan. She kept walking, glaring straight ahead. Why does she have to stay with us every time she visits? She thought angrily. Nanami was self-conscious as she began changing into her hero costume. She had very simple requirements, so the design squad had free range over what she wore. It had to be easy to move in. That was literally her only request. The design they went with, though. So embarrassing, she whimpered. Gyro nudged her, chuckling. Think about this. Hagakure is literally naked, except for her gloves and boots. She patted the girl's back. It's fine since you can't see me, though. They heard Hagakure chirp. Nanami sighed as she pulled it on. Yeah, but still. Her hero costume was simple. A black crop top with hot pink stripes under her chest, seeming to accent her chest, which was unimpressive in comparison to some of her other classmates. She wore black shorts with a utility belt around her waist. She had matching black ankle boots and gloves with pink fluffs on the rims. Attached to her belt was a slingshot, with a pouch hanging off the side. It doesn't look so bad, Nanami-chan. So you said, putting a finger to her chin as she examined the outfit. It's kind of like Kyoka-chan's. You could wear it anywhere, ribbit. But I feel so exposed, Su-chan. She covered her chest. Why are there these weird stripes under my chest? And you can see my navel. And my legs are all out there. She covered her face in embarrassment. It's just so indecent. So modest, was the single thought that ran through most of the girls' heads. Yayurazu chuckled and patted her shoulder. I think modesty is a good trait to have, Yoshino-san. Nanami glanced at her hero costume and found herself blushing as she looked away. Honestly, I feel a little better now, she muttered. Nanami stayed behind Gyro as she walked amongst her newly changed classmates. There were many different kinds of costumes. Some, she found, looking at Mainta and Todoroki, were a hit and miss. But for the most part, they all seemed to represent the wearers individually. She tugged on Gyro's jacket gently, finding comfort in the slightly taller girl's presence. Gyro laughed a little, causing Nanami to blush and look down timidly. Are you nervous someone in the class won't like your outfit? She asked teasingly. She turned over and poked the slightly smaller girl's cheek in amusement. She raised an eyebrow when Nanami didn't answer. It's amazing how you can stand up to that hothead Bakugo, but the idea of being in a crowd scares you. I dunno. Katsuki is scary. I'm usually scared out of my mind when I talk to him, she admitted. Katsuki, huh? You're on a first-name basis with him too? She asked, in shock. Are you actually friends with that guy? She sweat-dropped at the blank stare she was given by the blonde. She looked over her shoulder and smirked. Well, anyway, there's Midoriya. Why don't you go show him your costume? She offered, pointing in the direction from where the boy came. I'm sure he'll like it. Nanami looked back at where Izuku was standing. Her eyes softened at the costume. She honestly thought it was cute, and the mask nicely emphasized his big round eyes. She looked down at her costume and bit her lip. She looked at Gyro, who gave her a reassuring nudge. She took a breath in and walked up to him. Izuku, I like your costume. She tugged on her hair, a faint blush on her cheeks. It makes you seem approachable. Izuku smiled a little as he looked at Nanami's outfit. He blushed lightly and glanced away. Yours looks, he said nervously. Nanami winced at his reaction. She held her hands together and tilted her head down. It's not really my style, but I wasn't specific in what I wanted. I just asked for something that would promote mobility, she admitted. Her chest felt tight, and she didn't understand why. When you put it that way, it's pretty practical. What's in the belt? He asked, pointing to it curiously. It's medical staff. Just the basic first aid. She moved her hands to cover her navel. I just wish they added a little more. Man, I know the feeling. I ended up with this weird skin-tight costume. Nanami tensed at the sound of Uraraka's voice. She watched as Izuku blushed heavily through his costume and covered his mouth. She tugged on her hair, meekly walking away from the conversation and back towards Gyro. She wanted to cry for some reason, but she again didn't understand why. Gyro frowned at the small girl's steep drop in mood. She glanced back at the two friends, before looking back at the girl. Now I feel like an ass, she muttered to herself. She patted Nanami's head, before smiling a little. Hey, it's okay. Don't think too much about it. Nanami walked quietly beside Katsuki. They were playing the villains in their little assignment given to them by All Might. She glanced at her partner nervously. Katsuki, should I really be the one guarding weapon? She asked as she went up the stairs with him. I get that you want to fight, but what if they get past you? Katsuki glared at her. What? Are you trying to say you don't think I can beat that shitty Deku? He growled. Well, I can, and I will. That's why you're guarding the damn thing. You don't have to do anything except standing there and look. He stopped mid-sentence and clicked his teeth. I won't accept a loss, Freckles. So just shut up and do what I say. Nanami flinched and nodded. She tugged at her hair, sighing. She walked up to the last flight of stairs, looking up at the fake weapon. She walked up to it and rubbed the back of her neck, looking at Katsuki. So I'll just guard it. I'll leave the rest to you. Damn right you will. He grumbled and moved downstairs. All right, boys and girls, she heard All Might's voice ring. Begin. Nanami got low to the ground and pressed her ear to the floor, closing her eyes. While she didn't have her father's hearing quirk, she found that if she concentrated, she could hear slightly better than the average person. No to the extent that she could call it a quirk though. Oh, it sounds like one of them got past him already. Probably Uraraka, since Katsuki doesn't seem like he'd let Izuku go. Her heart began palpitating in anxiety. Uraraka can make things float. How can I compete with that? She looked around at all the items in the room the zero-gravity wielder could use against her. Thinking quickly on her feet, she grabbed the items and proceeded to throw them out the window. Not before making sure that there was no one below, of course. She looked around and debated between waiting by the door or by the weapon. After some debate, she decided on waiting by the weapon. All right. The goal is to capture Uraraka. Her hands twitched. What if? She walked throughout the room, leaving remnants of her misfortune on each pillar the pink-cheeked girl may hide behind. Once she was satisfied, she waited again by the weapon. That should do it. I don't want her to get hurt or anything, so I only used a little bit. She hummed as she picked up her slingshot, pulling an item from her pouch. It was a little rubber ball. She looked at the weapon as she poured her bad luck into the ball. Izuku really likes her, I think. Maybe I shouldn't get in their way. Besides, I guess this kind of thing wouldn't work for me. She clenched her fists. I say that, but the thought of giving him up hurts my heart, she sighed. Is this what having a crush is like? She wondered to herself. What? Uraraka's voice shrieked. Nanami's cheeks flushed bright red. Oh God, was that last part out loud? She grabbed her slingshot and placed the rubber ball in it. Pulling back, she aimed, trying to listen for Uraraka again. She waited for the Infinity Girl to make a move. A single pillar cracked, completely unprovoked. Nanami's eyes widened, and she took the shot, shooting right past the pillar, where the ball bounced off the wall and hit Uraraka in the thigh. Ouch, she heard. Nanami rushed in. I found you. Uraraka jumped from her hiding place, before jumping forward, her hand outstretched, ready to make the girl float. Nanami pushed one arm to the side, grabbing the other and moving in a wide swinging motion to throw her onto the ground. She was about to grab her and restrain her when the brunette kicked at her legs, causing her to fall over. Nanami squeaked in surprise as she felt herself floating in the air. She began to panic as she watched Uraraka run towards the weapon. No. I have to do something. She grabbed her slingshot and aimed at the girl's feet. Firing multiple misfortune-infused bouncy balls, she winced at the sight of her classmate tripping on them. Examining her location, she quickly planted her feet on a pillar and pushed herself off, launching towards Uraraka, who had just made herself float towards the weapon. Sorry, she apologized quickly, lifting her leg and slamming down her foot onto her opponent's shoulder, effectively slamming the airborne girl onto the ground with an axe kick. Nanami shrieked as she was suddenly dropped onto the ground, the effect of the brunette's quirk having been cancelled. Uraraka groaned as she got up slowly. Oh, I'm gonna feel that for a while. Nanami ran towards her, tape stretched out to tie her up. Uraraka, ready? Nanami vaguely heard Izuku's voice as Uraraka ran over to a pillar. Wait, what? Smash. And suddenly the floor below them shot up. Uraraka held the pillar up, having used her quirk on it. Sorry, Yoshino-chan. Improvised special move. Comet home run. Swinging the pillar similarly to an oversized bat, Uraraka swung, sending the debris flying through the air and straight towards her. Nanami braced herself, getting scratched by the rubble as Uraraka flew over her, landing on the weapon. Nanami's eyes widened. No, I failed. She sighed heavily and fell to the ground. Nanami sighed as Recovery Girl bandaged her up, giving her a lollipop at the end of it. She tugged at her hair in despair. She looked at Izuku, who was beside her, getting his arms healed. There you go, dearie. You should be more careful, she said, scolding the young man. She seemed frustrated. Man, that was insane, she heard him say as they left the infirmary. Nanami looked at him with a sad smile. He smiled at her. You did great, Nanami. Uraraka told me how she was close to losing. Nanami blushed and looked away. She glanced at his arm, scowling and punching it. Oh, why did you do that? Why did you do that? She exclaimed. You messed up your arms over Katsuki. I get that you guys have this long standing, whatever this is, but it's not worth doing that to yourself, she glared at him. What were you thinking? Exploding the entire building, she teared up angrily. Your arm was broken badly. You need to get that quirk of yours under control. Don't destroy your body just to prove a point. Izuku flinched. I know. Don't cry, Nanami. I'm sorry. I'll see you later, Izuku. Where are you going? He asked nervously. To yell at Katsuki, she hurried off, tugging at her hair painfully. I yelled at Izuku. I never thought I'd get mad at him. Nanami was confused as Katsuki accompanied her on her way to her house. They had a screaming match, Nanami about his overboard aggression towards Izuku, and Katsuki about Nanami not minding her own business. Neither of them was quite sure how it ended with him walking her home. Nanami walked behind him, on the inside of the sidewalk. For some reason, each time she moved closer to the road, he'd grab her arm and pull her further from it. So she was on the opposite side of him. After the third time, he kept a firm grip on her wrist. She honestly felt like a child being guided by a stern parent. "I'm sorry about the test earlier," she muttered, no longer able to handle the silence. "I tried to stop Uraraka, but she and Izuku are a really good pair." Her heart clenched as she admitted it. Katsuki found himself gritting his teeth, and he turned to her. "We'll just have to kill them next time then." He narrowed his eyes, glaring when she didn't respond. "Say it. We'll fucking win next time," he demanded. Do I have to curse?" she squeaked out. Katsuki scowled and squeezed her wrist. "Oh, okay. We'll win next time," he grunted and gave her a satisfied nod. "Kei Katsuki, you're hurting my wrist." "God, why are you so damn whiny?" He lowered his hand so that he was holding hers. "How's this? Is that fucking better?" he growled. Nanami blushed bright red and looked away. "If you stopped trying to get near the road, I wouldn't have to fucking do this." Nanami looked down at her shoes as they walked. "I've never held hands with a boy before." She glanced at their hands as they walked. "It's embarrassing. I don't know if I like it or not. But I feel like if I let go, he'll yell at me," she thought tiredly. Her phone pinged, startling her out of her thoughts. Looking at Katsuki, she sighed as he made no effort to let go of her hand. She awkwardly used her free hand to dig through the pocket of her skirt on the opposite side and pulled out her phone. It was from her mother. "Nanami, your grandmother is here a couple of days early. Isn't that great? Will you be home soon?" Nanami tensed as she read it. She gently squeezed Katsuki's hand. He glanced at her, his frown deepening as she stopped in her tracks. "What the hell are you doing? We're almost at your damned house," he barked. He raised an eyebrow at her lack of response. Cautiously, he asked, "Did someone die?" "No," she murmured. She looked at him, tugging at her hair harder than she usually did. "Katsuki, can I stay at your place for a few days?" she muttered weakly. "I don't want to go home." "Huh? What the fuck? No. Why the hell would you want to stay at my house? I already fucking told you, we aren't friends." Nanami nodded, laughing shakily. Right. I was just joking." She rubbed the back of her neck. "Super funny, right? Ha ha." She looked at her phone and sighed. She didn't bother to respond and put it away. Great. I was hoping to hole myself in during the weekend, but she had to show up early. She thought bitterly. She saw her house come from around the corner, her eyes narrowing. Katsuki scowled and glanced at the house. He stopped and pulled her close to him. "I don't care or anything, but are you being abused or some shit like that?" he asked quietly. Nanami bit her lip and glanced away. Katsuki clenched his teeth, trying to maintain his cool to avoid attracting attention. "Do they hit you?" he asked. Nanami shook her head. "It's not like that. They don't abuse me, just I don't feel comfortable when my grandmother comes to visit," she admitted. She looked up at him and smiled meekly. "I'm sorry to have worried you. I can go by myself now." Katsuki blushed and took a few harsh steps back, letting go of her hand immediately. "Don't get it twisted, Freckles. I wasn't worried. You were just pissing me off with that weird-ass face you were making. Got it?" His hands popped with little explosions to emphasize his point. He watched her lack of fear towards him as she gazed towards her house. Her eyes didn't seem quite as vibrant as usual. "Give me your phone," he grumbled. "What?" Nanami asked, turning her head to face him. "Did I fucking stutter?" "Give me your damn phone," he demanded, snatching the device as soon as it was in her hand. He pressed a few buttons, muttering in annoyance about outdated technology before handing it back. "There, now you have my number." Nanami blinked as she looked at the new addition to her contacts. What for?" Katsuki felt a vein throbbing in his head as he heard her question. Because I decided to fucking give it to you. Don't use it for stupid shit. You got that, Nana? His ears were warming up as he tried to control the heat spreading in his face. Nanami blinked at the sudden outburst. She hesitantly nodded, bowing slightly. Thanks, she huffed as he turned around and left without so much as a goodbye. Nanami looked at her screen and found herself amused at the contact name he had put in. King Explosion Murder? She laughed a little and quickly changed the name to something more fitting. She huffed as she kept walking, her house getting bigger until she was on the front step. Hajime welcomed her immediately. Nanami, there you are. You're all scratched up. Is that from school, or did you get chased by a dog again? He asked worriedly. He patted her head as she came in. School. All Might had us fight against each other as a villain-hero simulation. She answered simply as she stepped out of her shoes. She glanced at the wooden slippers in the corner and grimaced. Getting lessons from the #1 hero. My, how impressive you've become. Nanami tensed. Her blood ran cold as she heard the voice of the one person she dreaded. She gulped as her grandmother walked in. Her eyes struggled to avoid meeting the floor as she looked her in the eye. The lady looked to be in her late 50s, her blonde hair showing some signs of graying. She wore a plain, purple kimono as she entered the room. Nanami resisted the urge to tug her hair as she placed her hands neatly in front of her and bowed deeply. Hello, grandmother. She peeked up through her uneven bangs and met her grandmother's cold blue eyes. The elderly lady smiled, though it didn't seem to reach her eyes. Well, I see your manners have improved, though you've hardly grown since I've last seen you. She walked up to her, watching as her granddaughter slowly rose to meet her gaze. I came to celebrate your getting into Yui, lucky. Nanami stared at the food in front of her. She glanced at her grandmother, Mishiro, who sat across from her at the lunch table. It marked day 3 of her visit. Lucky. Are you not going to eat your breakfast? I worked hard to make it, she said, her eyes narrowed. Nanami grabbed her fork and ate her food unwillingly. Grandmother probably added a laxative or something. She glanced at the woman, wincing as her glare got colder. Nanami fought back her gag reflex as she quickly shoved her food down and forced herself to swallow. For a moment, she didn't feel anything. Then, she stood up abruptly. May I be excused? Sakura jumped, startled. Oh, of course. She watched as her daughter raced upstairs. She looked at her plate and chuckled a little. Mother, Nanami doesn't like mushrooms. They upset her tummy. Mashiro put a surprised hand to her mouth. Oh dear, I didn't know. I'll be more careful next time. Shift POV. Nanami coughed as she threw up the lunch that was provided to her. She watched the foam in the toilet bubble. She coughed a little more and quickly went to the sink to wash out her mouth. Soap? Is she trying to kill me now? She whispered to herself. She wiped her mouth and went to her room and grabbed her wallet. She looked at Mio, who was basking in the sun, and patted the fluffy creature. She took one last glance to the mirror and scowled, wiping her mouth again as she went downstairs. She peeked her head into the dining room. Can I go to the mall? Sakura glanced over at her and nodded in approval. Sure. Don't spend recklessly now, she called as she headed towards the door. Have a good time, Lucky, her grandmother called. Nanami didn't respond as she left the house. Nanami furiously yanked her hair as she tried to calm herself down. She needed some food, real food. She looked at the sky and debated on what to eat. She rubbed her now raw throat and sighed. Soba, she decided as she spotted a well-known shop. She stood in front of the shop as she tried to come up with a strategy in regards to her grandmother. Maybe Izuku will let me stay with him, she thought as she paid no mind to how long she had been standing there. Hey, brat, are you going in or not? An aggressive voice called from behind her. Nanami scowled and turned around, glaring at them. Just go around me. She tensed at the sight of the larger, older high schooler before her. Oh boy, she muttered. Hey, I know you. You're that girl that got muddy water dumped all over my brother, Yoshino. The brute growled, zooming in on her. He grabbed her arm when she tried to get out of his way. No, we gotta have a little talk. Nanami whimpered as she tried to remove his arm. She glared up at him weakly. Look, Kishino-senpai. I'm sure your brother wouldn't want you fighting his battles for him. So why don't you just let me go? And we go our separate ways, huh? Older Kishino scoffed and began dragging her away. Nanami felt her heartbeat speed up as she desperately looked around. Either no one noticed the interaction, or no one cared enough to help. She bit her bottom lip and closed her eyes. I want to be a hero. I won't rely on civilians. She glared up at the back of his head. Putting her other hand on his wrist, she began to pour her misfortune into him. She glared at her captor and waited. Maybe 3-4 minutes later, a flower pot dropped in front of him. Kishino stepped back at the last second, and Nanami took the opportunity to kick the back of his knee. He bent backward and loosened his grip enough for her to yank her hand out of his. You little runt. He turned around and lunged for her. Nanami shrieked and jumped back before running away, diving into the sober restaurant where the confrontation started. She immediately smacked into a firm body. She held her nose grunting, before looking up and being greeted by a familiar face. Yoshino? Nanami's eyes widened. Todoroki-kun, hi. She looked behind her and her eyes widened. Excuse me, she ran past him, ducking and weaving around people and bolted into the women's restroom. Kishino stormed and growling. Where is that little freak? He demanded. He spotted her just as she had entered and growled, banging on the door. Get the hell out here, you coward. I know that flower pot almost falling on me was your fault. Nanami covered her mouth, trying to remain silent in hopes he'll give up and go away. Crap. What do I do? I left my phone at home. I need to call my dad. Shift POV. Todoroki scowled as he watched the stranger bang on the lady's door. He didn't seem to care about the scene he was causing. He huffed and walked over to him, putting his hand on the brute's shoulder. He turned around. What the fuck do you want? He shrieked as his shoulder was suddenly frozen. Get out now before I freeze the rest of you until the police come. He switched hands with a tightened grip, heating the ice until it melted. Don't let me catch you harassing her again. The brute's eyes widened as he stared at Todoroki. He slapped his hand off and glared. This isn't over. He growled as he stalked out of the restaurant. Todoroki sighed and knocked on the door softly. Yoshino, he's gone now. You can come out now. He stepped back as the timid girl peeked out of the door. She glanced around to see that several concerned bystanders stared at her. She hesitated and came out, keeping her head lowered. Does that guy bother you often? Nanami kept her head down, shaking her head as she rubbed her sleeve against her eyes, wiping away tears before they fell. His brother used to bully me in middle school. I haven't seen either of them for a couple of months, so I didn't know what to do when I saw him. She tugged on her hair and sighed heavily. Thank you for helping me. Todoroki frowned as he watched her tug on her hair. It didn't look like a healthy habit. Do you want me to buy you some soba? He asked, motioning to a table. You can sit with me for a while, in case that guy comes back. Nanami looked back at the door, before sighing softly and nodding. Okay. Shift POV. Nanami slurped her soba, sighing with satisfaction at the gentle flavor. Thanks, Todoroki-kun. She looked up from her basket and tensed at the strong stare the boy was giving her. What? Are you okay? He asked quietly. Your face is paler than normal. He lifted a noodle and looked at it. Your face kind of reminds me of the noodles. Nanami's eye twitched. What? Realizing that what he said wasn't exactly flattering, he tried again. Um, that's not quite right. I mean, are you sick? She hesitated, remembering what her grandmother had done just an hour ago. I just have an upset stomach. She looked away from his gaze. What about you? You're incredibly angsty for a boy your age, she admitted. The first time I met you, I couldn't help but worry about you. She hesitated, taking a bite of her soba as she considered how to proceed. I'll tell you my story if you tell me yours, she offered half-heartedly. She didn't expect the icy hot boy to agree. I know we aren't friends, but you've been concerned since you met me? The boy repeated. Nanami smiled sheepishly. Yeah, sorry if that's weird. It's just that, when I met you and your dad, the look in your eyes, both of you, she looked at her companion awkwardly. It made me wonder if you were safe with him. She covered her left eye. Especially when I look at that. Is he responsible for that scar on your eye? She paused. You aren't obligated to tell me, of course, if it's a painful memory. Todoroki stared at her blankly, unsure what to make of the girl's perceptiveness. Nanami squirmed under his intense gaze and proceeded to eat her noodles, awkwardly dipping them into soy sauce. The silence between the teens was surprisingly comfortable as they seemed to be weighing out their options. Fine. Todoroki sighed. Nanami stopped mid-slurp to look at him with confused eyes. Huh? She finished her mouthful. Will it be fine if I don't tell you the whole thing? Nanami's sweat dropped and set her chopsticks down. I won't force you to say more than you're comfortable with. We haven't known each other long after all. Todoroki set his chopsticks down as he finished his food. Is it fine if we go somewhere more private? Nanami nodded, getting up after he paid the bill. As they exited, he looked around, searching for, she assumed, Kishino's brother. After a moment of confirmation, he grabbed onto her hand and led her through the crowd. He didn't say anything as they walked. Meanwhile, Nanami was trying to control her heart rate as she looked at his strong back as they walked. Why do I keep ending up holding his hand? I guess he knows my quirk could get me swept away in this crowd. She yelped as she was brought closer to him as the crowd got denser. Her cheeks flushed pink as his grip got tighter. He pulled her into an alley. This is a shortcut, but it might be kind of tight for you, he muttered as he walked. Wait, where are we going? She asked, stumbling slightly over some litter. It's not far from here. It's somewhere quiet that I like to go to when I want to get away from my stupid old man. Soon they had ventured into a wooded area. Todoroki let go of her hand once they had made it deep into the woods. Nanami looked around in curiosity. She was amazed at the large trees. She had seen the woods many times, but never thought to wander in fear of her quirk causing her to get lost or injured. I'll tell you the minimum of my story, all right? He grumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. And in return, you'll tell me yours. Nanami nodded as he sat down on the grass. Nanami swept under her skirt as she sat beside him. Ever since I could remember, my father trained me as a tool, hoping I would one day topple All Might. He looked at his left hand. My mother was very kind to me at first, but she couldn't handle the abuse he threw at her and me. If I tried to remember her, I could only recall her crying. My father would train me, regardless if I got sick or badly injured myself. He would hit my mother if she tried to stop him. Nanami frowned. She found herself tugging on her hair, feeling anxious for her classmate. Other than that, she made no sudden movements. No sounds that would discourage the boy from continuing. My mother was driven mad, and he covered his left eye, refusing to continue. He looked back at her, frowning. I'll reject that old man. For as long as my body allows it, I won't use my left side. I'll show him that I can be the best without his power. He nodded as if to assure himself. It's your turn. Nanami cringed, and she looked at her lap. I only somewhat understand what he told me. But I guess I was right when I assumed Endeavor was a scumbag. I hope he'll tell me more one day. She sighed and fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, debating how she should go about telling the boy her story. Todoroki frowned. He slouched to get a look at her face. I know I said you have to tell me if I told you. But if it's painful then. My mom is in a wheelchair because of me, she said quietly. Todoroki sat up straight at this. When my quirk first manifested, I had no control and bad luck would spread to those around me, even if I didn't want it to. Beads of sweat trickled down her neck, her chest tightening at the memory. There was an accident. We were just coming from the store and, well, by the end of it, my mom couldn't walk anymore. Todoroki pursed his lips. He opened them slightly, pausing as he tried to come up with the right words. Does she hurt you? He asked simply. Nanami smiled sadly. No. If anything, she spoils me more now. She's always saying, I'm just glad it was me, and not you. She refuses to blame me, but I know it's my fault. She turned to him, her eyes softening. It's my grandmother that's the issue. She despises me. She used to be so kind, but after the accident, she would berate me whenever we were alone. Her eyes darkened as she clenched her fists. She'd do little things that my parents wouldn't notice. She would yank my hair if I did something wrong, and she would hit me if I talked back, but only when my parents weren't around. The last time she visited, she chopped off my hair. I'm not quite sure how, but she convinced my parents that I wanted to try something new, even though I was growing it out. She put her hand to her throat, her smile dropping. Just an hour ago, she put soap in my food, all under the guise of making lunch for my family out of the kindness of her heart. Todoroki scowled. And she does this all the time? He asked angrily. No, only on visits. She doesn't live with us, thankfully. She smiled sheepishly. I'm positive she fully blames me for my mother's accident. She looked down, her brows furrowing. I hate her, and what she does. But since my parents don't resent me, I feel like I'm just getting what I deserve. Her eyes widened, and she laughed nervously. God, I'm sorry. I ended up telling you way more than I intended. He frowned, before shaking his head. It's fine. Yoshino, how long will she be staying with you? Nanami rubbed the back of her neck in thought. She should only be here a few more days. She never stays longer than a week. Todoroki frowned and looked around at the trees surrounding them. Do you get lost often because of your quirk? He asked. Nanami hesitated and puffed out her cheek instead of answering. Do you want me to bring you here sometimes when your grandmother visits? Huh? I come here to escape and just be by myself. That way, that damned old man of mine can't bother me. If your grandmother visits you, and you don't feel safe, you can come here or something. He stood up, picking up a stone, and throwing it in a random direction. This place is quiet. The trees are thick, so people don't really come out here. It's a good place. He offered his hand to her. Nanami smiled a little. She took his hand and was pulled up, for once not being lifted off the ground. Yeah, I'd appreciate it, she said quietly. Hey, I won't tell anyone what you told me, so can you keep this a secret? Especially from Izuku. I'm worried he might try to get involved. Todoroki looked to the side, before scratching the side of his head. I suppose. It's not my story to tell. He looked at their hands. Think you can follow me? Or do you need me to hold your hand still? Nanami shook her head, smiling. I should be fine. It's about time I got home. I only really went out to eat. She dusted off her skirt and followed him towards the end of the woods. She made a note of any unique features, trying to remember the way here quickly so she didn't have to bother him. She noted the trees with holes in them and the certain flowers that dotted the grass. They walked into the alley, and she made note of the faded graffiti on the walls. They made it into the open sidewalk, and Nanami watched the buildings while trying to keep an eye on her classmate's unique hair to avoid getting lost. She had to speed up to keep up with him in the thickening crowd. though it wasn't long until it became too much. "Todoroki, help. I'm being swept away." The slightly older teen turned around and was startled to see that the petite girl was literally being swept away by the crowd. He sighed and shuffled through the sea of people and grabbed her hand. He pulled her along, avoiding her gaze lest she sees the mildly amused glint in his eye. Nanami looked at her contacts in her phone, Todoroki's number having been newly added. Her eyes narrowed in realization. "I should ask for Jiro-chan's number. For some reason, I only have numbers from boys. If someone saw that they might think lowly of me," she muttered to herself. She thought back to the dual-quirked boy, frowning as she recalled the information given to her. She desperately wanted to know more, but didn't push her boundaries in fear of making him angry with her. There was this strong desire to help him, and she had no idea how she would do it. For now, her goal was simply to become friends with the unfortunate teen, and hopefully, she would become someone he could speak to openly. Nanami listened for any disturbances in her house. Everyone was asleep, including, she hoped, her grandmother. Nanami crept into the halls, approaching the guest room as silently as possible. Her father was out on a late shift, so for what she was going to do, now was the best time to do it. She stood in front of her grandmother's room. She grabbed hold onto the doorknob and began to pour her misfortune into it. "Just a little. If I put too much, she'll know it was me," she thought. She stopped after a few seconds and quietly snuck back into her room. She laid down in her bed and closed her eyes. Hopefully, she'll be a bit inconvenienced in the morning.